I mean, your family were forced out of Syria. You left when you were 9 years old. You're clearly a man very well connected in Washington, but ultimately you were born a Syrian. Are you going to go home?
Yes, sir. First of all, so many of my family members, some are in Germany, some are in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon. Those both in Europe and those that are in the region are all making plans to go home. Countless friends are going home. I was looking at some numbers and some reporting about 50,000 Syrians came back from Turkey in a matter of a week. Those that are in, the people that are in Germany, there are hundreds of thousands being all over in the United States. They all want to go home. I know a family in Philadelphia that I was meeting on my way up here. I saw by randomly, and I was like, hey, what's your plan now? And his name is Muayyad, my friend. And he said, me, my wife and kids, we're moving back. We're moving back to Syria. For the first time in decades, Syria is now safe. You don't get arbitrarily arrested at a checkpoint because you have the wrong name or you're born in the wrong place or the guy wants, a bribe. Corruption has been, how hard is corruption to take out of a society? Corruption evaporated in Syria as these security forces and intelligence branches and this mafia that ruled the country dissipated. And so now, today, Syria is safe.
Well, as Mustafa, we have to end there. Thank you very much for joining me on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
That was Hard Talk. I'm Saroja Coelho. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Well, good Tuesday morning, everyone. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and this is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg. Great to be back with you after a little bit of time off. Thanks to Corey Funk and Faith Fundel for filling in for me while I was away. We are the morning show here on CBC, on air till 8:37 a.m. And if you need us in traffic at any point, the number to call on the commuter line is 788-3093. Wow, it is mild out there. We do have a snowfall warning to tell you about. This is for northern Manitoba. Lynn Lake, Leaf, Puck, Brochet expecting about 10 centimeters of snow to continue to fall. In Winnipeg, mix of sun and cloud, chance of flurries or maybe rain showers given how mild it is. Today's high will be 2 degrees and it's really mild right now. I think we're at -2 currently. Well, let's say good morning to the team. May McKillop is in for Corey Funk. Hi, May. May is directing the show and also will be on air covering the commute details. Travis Peterson is in. He is our YouTube producer and sitting in today for Kev. As well, Abby Adiyemi is at his usual post as our technical producer on the program, and we always talk to Abby on air about the weather forecast. Right now, at 2 minutes to 6, Heather Wells gives us our news headlines. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Welcome back. Well, a plan to redevelop the historic Alexander Docks is moving forward. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a request for proposals for design work on that site. A condition assessment by the city last year found the docks in need of major repairs. Consultations with businesses and people who live nearby are expected to be held this spring. Canadian farm supply and hardware retailer PV Mart plans to close its stores in Manitoba. Now, the chain announced last week it's closing stores in Ontario and Nova Scotia. Manitoba stores notified customers on Monday they too will close within the next few months. I'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 6:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, this morning in the program, some political leaders are advising shoppers to buy Canadian in the face of threats from the U.S. We're going to talk to an economist about whether or not that tactic is actually effective and achievable for an average person. So stay tuned. We'll walk through that. In addition, in the second hour of the show, animal rights advocates, as you may have been hearing, are applauding a decision by the Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association to ban the practice of docking tails on dogs. So we're going to talk to a local vet about why he's in support of that ban. So that is coming up in a full conversation. Right now, though, it's time for World Report at 6.
Today on Q.
Where are you from in Europe? Sweden. Oh, cool. Well, all this furniture came assembled.
The Montreal comedian Sugar Sammy is back in Canada on a 20-city tour. The multilingual equal opportunity offender will be here to talk about what's on his mind this time out and to give his no-holds-barred view of the state of the world and comedy today.
Q with Tom Power. This morning at 10, 10:30 in Newfoundland. And on the CBC Listen app.
This is World. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. We know foreign governments have been meddling in Canadian democracy. We do not yet know which of our institutions are the most vulnerable. But today, the public inquiry into foreign interference releases its final report. Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogg will provide answers about what is at risk and what we need to do to protect it. Janice McGregor is in our Parliamentary Bureau. And Janice, what are you watching for today?
Marcia, Marie-Josée Hogg is a judge, and for those of us who do not have the security clearance to see top secret intelligence, her learned opinion today is the closest we're going to get to a verdict on how worried we should be. Did that committee of parliamentarians overreach and misinterpret what they read when they released that bombshell report suggesting some parliamentarians, wittingly or not, were collaborating with hostile foreign states? This inquiry can't release the names, but it could recommend how to handle this. Does the classified evidence back up the allegation that the Chief of Staff and former Public Safety Minister Bill Blair's office slow-walked a CSIS request to electronically monitor a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister as part of their monitoring of Chinese Communist Party officials in Canada? And as leader Pierre Poilievre continues to refuse security clearance to read evidence for himself, did this inquiry see intelligence that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had suggested exists, laying out that some Conservatives were involved in foreign interference, including during their recent leadership battles? The origins of this inquiry were media reports on Beijing's meddling in the last two election cycles, but the threats heading into the next one even broader. Tensions with India over the Modi government's role in killing a Canadian in BC. Tensions with Iran, which has targeted former Liberal Justice Minister Erwin Kotler since the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. And tensions with Russia as Canada continues to vigorously support Ukraine in its war.
We're almost into a new federal election. Are these recommendations coming too late?
If the commissioner recommends things that require legislation, well, it's hard to imagine that passing before the House of Commons pulls the plug this spring and heads to the polls. A bill with some changes that authorities wanted died when Parliament was prorogued. A new foreign influence transparency registry became law last June, but no commissioner was appointed since to do that work. So the fixes are slow here, while the new threats pop up quickly.
Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
Janice McGregor reporting from Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Warsaw meeting with his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk. They are expected to sign an agreement on nuclear energy cooperation between Canada and Poland. Export Development Canada has suggested Poland could build its first nuclear power plant using goods and services from Canadian suppliers, and Ottawa could provide up to $2 billion in financing. UN staff and their families arrive in Kigali, Rwanda. Violent battles between rebels and government forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo forced them from Goma across the border.
Au nom du président de la République, a félicité la population.
Congo's National Assembly Speaker congratulating the army in the eastern province of North Kivu. Government officials say their army is holding off Rwandan-backed M23. M23 claims to have taken over the city of Goma. Today, the EU's foreign ministers are calling for Rwanda to withdraw its troops and to end its support for the rebel forces. Thousands of Palestinians are heading home on the second day of open roadblocks. Large crowds of people walk down a road lining Gaza's Mediterranean shore. Their return to the north is part of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Yesterday, more than 300,000 people crossed into the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But as Chris Brown reports from Jerusalem, most of Gaza is in ruins.
Overnight, the terrible reality that there is very little to return to in northern Gaza hit home for those who made the long trek north. People will sleep on the ground, said Abu Muhammad, surveying his shattered former neighborhood in Gaza City. There's nothing left. Saib al-Hazar's house was only partially demolished. He stayed behind while his family fled, and now everyone is reunited.
We could not believe it was just a dream to meet our people again, to see them again for a minute. No matter what, we will build it again. We will rebuild it again.
Hundreds of truckloads of aid are now arriving in Gaza every day, and with Hamas-run police and private guards providing security, There appears to be less looting and less hunger, say aid agencies. UNICEF's Jonathan Crick says among the major concerns is caring for all of the children whose parents were killed and are now alone.
There is more than 17,000 children who are unaccompanied or separated from their parents.
Hamas has said its negotiators are in Cairo to begin the next phase of ceasefire talks. Top U.S. officials are in the region too, and Qatar says it's pushing both sides to keep the fragile truce going. Chris Brown, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Anti-corruption protests against the Serbian government have been happening in the country for weeks. Now this morning, the Prime Minister says he's resigning. Milos Vucevic says his departure will lower tensions in Serbia. Demonstrators in Belgrade have wanted accountability in a construction accident. A concrete canopy collapsed in November. 15 people were killed. Many protesters say political corruption led to sloppy reconstruction work. A Saskatoon research hub is preparing for future pandemics. Researchers there have just received a multi-million-dollar grant, and they are working on developing a new vaccine. Dane Patterson has more.
Volker Gertz says Canada was not prepared for the last pandemic. It was outmaneuvered by the COVID-19 virus.
So let's make sure that next time we're better prepared.
Gertz is the director and CEO of the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, or VIDO for short. It's developing a vaccine to protect against a wide range of coronaviruses. That includes SARS-CoV-2, the virus behind the COVID-19 pandemic, and potentially future viruses.
This is why we're here. We're protecting Canadians from the next infectious disease, the next pandemic, right?
It's a tall order. Dr. Nicole Leary knows that. She's a part of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. It has granted VIDO $24 million to drive that research.
This vaccine could kind of serve as a holy grail, protecting us against both the coronaviruses we know about and the ones that could still strike in the future.
Leary says the vaccine combines fragments of several different coronaviruses. It's meant to prompt a strong immune response.
Our goal is to be sure that the world is never again hit by a coronavirus pandemic.
VIDO's vaccine is being built to be thermostable. It won't need to be stored or transported in a temperature-controlled environment. That allows regions and countries with less resources to have better access to the vaccine. Dane Patterson, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Chinese AI company DeepSeek is making waves on the stock market and in the tech world. Developers say the platform is powerful and cheaper to produce. It has tech companies around the world taking notice. The CBC's Scott Peterson joins me now in studio. And Scott, why is this app toppling giants?
Well, this is being considered a real Sputnik moment in the sense that we assumed that the U.S. was the dominant player in artificial intelligence, and now this so-called unknown Chinese company is basically upending all of our assumptions about U.S. dominance. And industry experts are saying that this DeepSeek application is being called a Chinese startup, that it has comparable computational ability to the big players like ChatGPT, Google, Meta, but it does it at a fraction of the cost. And there's three reasons why I saw such turmoil yesterday in the markets. One, DeepSeek is an artificial intelligence app. It needs less microchips. Hence, we saw NVIDIA shares going down dramatically, 17%, losing $600 billion. Less electricity as well is needed because they're using less Cameco. TransAlta shares also dropping in Canada dramatically. And it's a truly open AI system, which means it could undercut Microsoft and ChatGPT because it's entirely open source. This could upend and is upending already the entire dominance of the U.S.
But the U.S. government just made some new investment in AI just last week.
And with big fanfare, Donald Trump and a lot of the industry players, there's a $500 billion investment. And you get a sense here that the timing is interesting, the DeepSeek just coming out now with the Trump administration. And there's also a lot of questions about DeepSeek. What are they? They're being called a startup, but are they a part of the Chinese government? Have there been billions of dollars invested behind the scenes that we don't know about? So there's a lot of questions being unwound, and we're seeing it on these markets reacting very dramatically.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Marcia.
Scott Peterson from CBC News. And that is the latest from World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
6:10 a.m. Mild, -1. Going to be above 0 today in the city of Winnipeg. This hour on the program, when's the last time you struck up a conversation with a stranger? Someone you don't know. Would you even know how to approach that if you want to make connection? We have a really interesting interview coming up to listen to, so stay tuned. In addition, this hour on the program, U.S. President Donald Trump is urging his country to buy American. So if Canadians are going to take similar steps and buy Canadian, what does that look like? So stay tuned. We will dig into those details at a level that really analyzes our lives to see what we're already buying and also whether or not doing that will make any kind of a difference. News headlines, though, first with Heather Wells. Good morning.
Good morning. And on that same topic, a Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Brock Coots at Patent 5 says leveling the playing field could help Manitoba's craft alcohol producers as a possible trade war with the U.S. looms. And vets in this province are no longer able to dock or remove a dog's tail. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association amended a bylaw on Friday, axing the controversial cosmetic procedure. We're going to hear why coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Abby Adeyemi is in next with our weather forecast. Good morning.
Morning to you. How are you doing today?
I'm good, but I'll tell you, I was off and I was in a milder climate, and then I'm like, oh, who needed to do that? Like, I was still in Canada, and I'm like, I could just be right here at home, according to this morning.
Yeah, well, an extension of your vacation is still continuing in Winnipeg, so
it's melting out there.
It's melting out there across the province. We should see a mix of sun, clouds, and flurries, or even rain showers in the forecast somewhere today, with temperatures ranging from mild down south to freezing and northern part of the province, with that snowfall warning in effect. For Winnipeg and surrounding environment, it's going to be a mild one. The streets are wet. It's going to be a messy one, so you need to fill up your windshield fluids this morning. Right now, -1 in Winnipeg, some clouds hanging out, and we're looking at a high of +2 today.
Right?
Yeah, so I'll take that.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
May McKillop's here to talk about if there's anything going on in the commute.
Nothing to report yet. I will say it was a slushy drive in. If you got you're going to want to have your windshield wipers on and make sure that you have your fluid filled up. Looking outside of the city quickly, heading northeast outside of Winnipeg in the Gimli Victoria Beach area, we are seeing some partly covered conditions, but I'm seeing the plows move along. Anything you're seeing along the commute today, give me a call, 204-788-3093.
Well, let's revisit that question that I just posed. When is the last time you had a conversation with someone that you don't know? CBC's Jim Agapito went out to ask that question and got a mix of responses from Winnipeggers, as you might have heard on the show yesterday. So we wanted to dig into whether or not there are any health benefits to shooting the breeze with someone new. Janine Hubbert is a psychologist based out of St. John's, Newfoundland, and she spoke to host Faith Fundell and Up to Speed all about it.
Hi, good afternoon. It is so nice to actually get to see you.
It's nice to see you as well, because we're, of course, talking by Zoom. And there is something about being able to see people face to face, isn't it? As part of talking to strangers. What is it? Let's talk about the benefits here of talking to strangers. What sort of stands out for you when you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. And of course, there's personal variables. There are some people who need more social interactions and really feed off of them and thrive off of them. And other people who are quite happy to go, quite some time with very minimal social interactions. So we know that just exists as, personality factors. But what we also know is that social connections, social interactions are an essential human need. That ability to connect with others, to feel sense of a community. We know that the World Health Organization and the U.S. Surgeon General have declared loneliness an epidemic. So we've realized that whether it's something that you thrive on and really enjoy, or whether it's something you need to do with effort, making social connections, even tiny, minuscule ones like waving hello to a stranger can make a really big difference on our physical and our mental well-being.
Something that I took with me when I moved here from small town northern British Columbia was the wave. Every time I drive by, it doesn't matter if it's here in Winnipeg or if I'm in a small town, insert any small town. If I see someone, I usually wave, and there is something that feels nice about that connection. I also have to say, I was out this weekend to an event. And someone came up to me and said, "Hi, are you Faith Fundal?" And of course, I had never met them, didn't know them. I said, "Yes, nice to meet you." And she said that she is a listener from Dauphin. But I specifically remember thinking, "You are a stranger, but also I don't feel like you're a stranger because now we've connected." I know it's a one-way thing. You listen, but it sort of made me feel that whatever that is. How would you describe what that feeling is for people who experience similar things?
Well, it is a real grounding and a sense of connection. And I'll be honest, people who work in radio have no idea how intimately connected complete strangers feel about that situation. I'll be honest, the first time I met our local morning show host, I sort of said to him, I wake up in bed with you every morning. Like, this feels very strange, but you feel almost an artificial connection, which is a different form of connection. And you know what? There's something very powerful for that. And we do rely on our media to get us through things like blackouts and blizzards. And so here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have the infamous wink and a nod.
Oh, right.
That is kind of that very subtle, doesn't matter if you know the person. Talking to people in grocery lines, saying hello to the cleaners as you're walking down the hall. These are all essential, what we call micro social interactions. And one of the things that we discovered during lockdown was just how valuable they were. You wouldn't think you would miss saying, good morning when you get your cup of coffee. You don't know the person's name. You've, never said anything other than good morning, thank you. How are you? But we've discovered that can really be very important. So it doesn't have to be going out and finding a best friend. And it doesn't have to be engaging in a lengthy conversation with a stranger, but that lovely Canadian mutual bonding over whatever the weather is doing on that given day. You know what? You always have a built-in topic to start at least a brief, hey, how you doing?
I've heard from people who have made it in an intentional thing to acknowledge other people. But I don't know if it's a but. And they also manage this anxiety over saying hello or even waving to someone. What do you say to people who might feel those sorts of things about how to manage that, especially if they want to engage with people but can't because it just doesn't feel good?
For sure. And like I say, I'm someone where it comes very naturally. I've always talked to strangers in the grocery line, which is ironic because I grew up in Ontario, where if you talk to people in the elevator, they either thought you were selling them something,
right,
trying to convince them to join a cult, or trying to hit on them. And it's like, no, we're just saying hi. So for some people, it's personal factors. For others, it's cultural factors. Either tending to reach out or tending to be more withdrawn. So it is going out and being really intentional. A compliment to a stranger goes a long way, so long as it's sincere. Anyone out there, if you see someone walking a dog, that's your built-in, or if you want to socialize more or borrow someone's dog, go volunteer for the local dog shelter, because it is amazing how that is an instant bonding and connection, and a few minutes with a stranger that can be very intentional and leaves you feeling quite fulfilled afterwards.
In that tape that we just heard from Jim Agapito, one of the folks talked about stranger danger. I mean, how do you decide when to say hello, especially when it comes to considering stranger danger?
Well, and I do think there are some safety factors, and when in doubt, listen to your spidey sense. Obviously, some of the things I'm suggesting are things you do in public spaces with lots of people around. It's interesting, where you feel safe. And if a conversation starts to go in a direction that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's when you kind of go, oh, lovely chatting with you. I got to go. Bye.
Yeah, thanks. Bye. See you later.
And that's not rude. You don't know this person. You don't owe them anything. And if you're not feeling good about it, very quick to keep yourself in safety. And it is really interesting, though. So we sometimes see some gender and some cultural differences in terms of I just want to say hi to somebody, but I'm worried they might be intimidated. I'm worried they might think it's, come on, or something along those lines.
So when you think of the people that you've interacted with, or the people, whether they're a client or not, what's one thing you think people should consider when they're going to say hello to a stranger?
Look for openness. And if you are someone who wants to do more socializing, you need to analyze. Is it someone who's there with their earbuds in, staring at their phone, body language closed off? Are you someone who is approachable? Do you smile? Do you, have your posture up and you're looking around? And that's far more likely, are you looking around? Do you briefly make eye contact and, just kind of acknowledge that there's another human being in your presence? Those are all things on both sides that can help to make it feel safe to, comment on the weather or just say good morning.
I love that. That's Janine Hubbert, psychologist based out of St. John's, Newfoundland. I mostly love that we're talking about it. Like, what a great subject, right? So we want to hear from you this morning. Do you chat up strangers? If you do, why? What's the benefit? Where do you do it? Or, do you duck and head into the next grocery aisle? Try to press the button to get off the elevator. I can be accused of that at moments, of course. But if you are, having those engagements, let us know why and what you miss when you don't have them. 788-3205 if you want to weigh in, or you can write to us on my Marcy Marcusa Facebook page. It is 6:22 a.m. The time right now, -1, drifting snow in Winnipeg, but our high today is going to be 2 degrees, and we are expecting that we could see some flurries or even showers this afternoon given the temperature. Got that overhead shot on YouTube. You can see it right now. Of course, if you're watching the show there, just the streets are wet in downtown Winnipeg. Well, let's talk politics now. From Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, political leaders say that buying made-in-Canada products could help the country's economy push back against American tariffs. But according to some economists, actually choosing Canadian goods is often easier said than done. To talk about why, Viet Vu's here to talk a little about it, Manager of Economic Research at the DAIS at Toronto Metropolitan University. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy. Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you so much for being back. So why do you think that this political rhetoric is appealing to all sides now?
Yeah, I think we start, just like I said last week, right? But we start by acknowledging that this tariff cannot be understood in economics terms because it makes zero sense economically. And so again, you have to use a political lens here to understand it. And once you do, you realize that for our leaders to respond, they need that domestic support. And stirring that sense of pride in being Canadian is really useful. But there's also another dynamic here, which is a real sense that Canadians just went through one of the toughest cost of living challenges in recent history, and no political leaders can actually afford to bear the blame for another one. So it's also about clearly communicating whose fault the increase in prices would be.
What about the question I posed at the beginning, or the scenario that it's often easier said than done to actually buy Canadian goods for the average consumer? Why is that? What gets in the way?
It's really tough, as you say, right? Because honestly, two very simple issues. First is around pricing. The reason why we import so many things from elsewhere, because those can be made cheaper than if we were to produce them ourselves. So Canadian alternatives, if they exist, are likely to be more expensive. And sometimes it's just not available. It turns out avocado doesn't grow in Manitoba in the winter. The second issue, though...
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't exactly. But the second issue, though, is about our complex supply chain. So think about a McDonald's Filet-O-Fish. The buns could be baked in Canada, but the eggs for the tartar sauce could actually come from a poultry farm in the US. And the fish that they use, which is Alaskan pollocks, which the name suggests is caught in Alaska. And so instead of getting Filet-O-Fish, do you get a Big Mac instead because they use Canadian beef? Well, what if that Canadian cow was fed feed that was imported from the US? So once you break down something as simple as a burger or sandwich, you realize that it's becoming really difficult to figure out what's actually quote unquote Canadian when over $1 trillion of goods trade between two countries every single year.
It might be. I mean, most people might start with saying, well, if I go to the grocery store and I pick up a product, can I sort of look at the bottom and see where it's made? Is that our just easiest way in? Because you're, as you said, breaking down the Big Mac and all the components is not going to be what the average consumer is going to engage in.
Absolutely right. And guess what? If you are a little bit too difficult whenever you're going grocery shopping to figure out which each of these labels come from, my suggestion is actually buy seasonally, because it turns out getting seasonal stuff, and in the winter in Canada, that would be things like potatoes, broccolis, leeks, root vegetables, things that's really good in making soup. Or you realize that all of those tend to come locally. And on top of that, because it's seasonal and it's just much more abundant, they end up being cheaper as well.
How far could this actually go, this kind of a threat anyway, in terms of actual economic effect to push back against tariffs? I'm just sort of thinking about past boycotts. The most recent one, I guess, was some people getting together. Maybe not, maybe the numbers weren't big enough, but it was against a Superstore at the time because they were talking about worried about pricing. So it was a group of consumers that were like, we're not going to buy there anymore, any of the, Superstore under the companies under that banner. And it didn't, even make a blip is the reality. So I'm just wondering, for something like this, can it actually work anyway?
Yeah, I mean, as we also saw with Donald Trump, right? A tariff economic cost, I don't think mattered too much to him. He used the political gambit just over the weekend, negotiating with Colombia over the threat of deportation planes, and he won in that. And so, look, the reality is it might not do much to prevent the tariff from happening. And if it happens, it's going to be devastating for the economy, and many, many people and companies will suffer. But if it happens, and that's a big if, and if it looks like the tariff will stay, an interesting thing happens, which is that markets will start adjusting. You'll find that suppliers who are price sensitive will start pursuing trade or sourcing with other countries or getting stuff locally, because those end up being cheaper. So it's not an ideal world that I'm painting here, but in a perverse way, buying locally will become easier because many producers will have no better choice. And so, you might see diners start pushing you more apple juice instead of orange juice, because again, turns out oranges doesn't grow in the winter in Manitoba.
What about retailers? What's their role in all of this when it comes to promoting Made in Canada products? And do you think that we're going to even see more deals? Like your example about McDonald's, the Canadian beef. But if the eggs aren't coming from here, we have plenty of places in Canada where we could be producing eggs, and we do, right? So I wonder whether or not we're going to start to see those things change for us.
Yeah, and I think we have to distinguish the long run and the short run here. In the long run, if these tariffs are actually in place, all of those things that you talked about supply chain adjusting will happen. But in the short run, I think all of these conversations not new. We all have heard the spiel, to buy books from your local bookstore instead of ordering online from Amazon. But unfortunately, much of our economic activities come from these large, often multinational companies, of which Canada is just one out of many markets that they operate in. Think about Walmart, big presence in Canada, but headquartered in the States. For these companies, there's no real reason for them to feel nationalistic, apart from the economic pressures that we already discussed.
I'm now Googling if you can grow Manitoba avocados while we're talking, because I feel like someone found a way, and I'm going to hear from the audience this morning. I got that somewhere in my head. Thank you very much for the discussion today. Appreciate your time.
No, thanks as always for having me on.
That's Viet Vu, a manager of economic research at the DAIS at Toronto Metropolitan University. So that's a good question too, right? What are you growing? I remember years ago doing some stories about, over the years, there's been many stories about the innovation of growing different vegetables fresh up north year round. And I know that different types of produce as well. And certainly we can grow some oranges here, but they're pretty small compared to what we're getting out of the States. Are you going to shop Canadian? If you want to weigh in, you know what I'm going to say. You can always call our listener line. We've been in conversation there with Viet Vu. I'm Marcy Marcuso with our team here at Information Radio. Travis and May and Abby behind the glass today in our control room. Thank you so much for joining all of us here on the show. Your morning show's on till 8:37. Traffic right now wet out there. It's just going to be the kind of day where you're going to use your wipers, and you might not even need fluid, but top it up anyway because the street might just do it for you, right? Spraying up the wet stuff. Very mild. It's -1. 788-3093 if you do see anything that you want to report to us. We'll pass it along on that commuter line. Well, coming up on Information Radio in the next half hour of the program, we have business news, and Chrisley Ramlakan is here. We're going to talk about why tech stocks have been sliding. Right now, your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, it is -1. And Marcy mentioned how messy it is. It is going to be a mild, slushy day. And it could get slushier because this afternoon there's a chance of flurries or even rain showers. Our high today is 2. A Manitoba man's name is one step closer to being cleared more than a decade after he died. Russell Woodhouse from Pinemutang First Nation has been considered a convicted killer for more than 50 years. Woodhouse and 3 others were convicted of killing a man in 1973. The other men have since been exonerated, but Woodhouse's family is still awaiting a decision from Canada's Justice Minister in his case. Innocence Canada lawyer James Lockyer says the case was marred by racism at every turn.
It's kind of hard to believe. You'd think in 1974 things would have been better than this, but they weren't. The racism in the criminal justice system was overwhelming.
If Woodhouse is exonerated, it will be the first time for a person who has died. The Federal Justice Department says it is still reviewing the case. A historic Winnipeg site will soon get a major redevelopment. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a contract to redesign the Alexander Docks. Built in 1929, the condition of the Alexander Docks has declined over the years, and a section was fenced off in 2015. Zach Peters speaks for the Forks.
The Alexander Docks has been a derelict site for, 10 plus years. It's fenced off. It's a mess. Something is needed. The status quo is not working and not what any of us would like. And so this is why we've sort of joined into this conversation and to be a part of this with the city to help renew this area.
An engineering assessment last year concluded demolition and construction of new docks could cost around $2 million. Canadian farm supply and hardware retailer PV Mart plans to close its stores in Manitoba. The chain announced last week it will close stores in Ontario and Nova Scotia. Manitoba stores notified customers yesterday they too will close within the next few months. The chain has 2 stores in Winnipeg, 1 each in Brandon, Winkler, and Steinbach. PV Mart started in BC. It is now based in Alberta. A Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to buy Canadian and reduce barriers to trade between provinces. Brock Coots owns Patent 5. He says it could help offset the impact from any U.S. imposed tariffs. Coots would like to see more level playing field for craft distillers and brewers. Canada's premiers have launched a renewed effort to remove interprovincial barriers to trade, and Coots has a request.
The other premiers allow craft distillers in other provinces to receive the same benefits that Manitoba affords you.
Coots says small producers in provinces like Alberta and BC can sell their products in Manitoba at the same markup rate as local companies. But he says those provinces don't offer reduced markups to Manitoba distillers and brewers, making companies like his uncompetitive outside this province. A final report from the public inquiry into foreign interference is being released today, and it will include a number of recommendations from Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue on how to prevent foreign meddling in Canadian elections. The inquiry looked at allegations of interference by a number of countries, including India and Russia. But national security analysts say it may be difficult for Ottawa to implement any preventative measures in time for the next federal election, which could be called within just a matter of months. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Warsaw meeting with his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk. They are expected to sign an agreement on nuclear energy cooperation between Canada and Poland. Export Development Canada has suggested Poland could build its first nuclear power plant using goods and services from Canadian suppliers. And Ottawa could provide up to $2 billion in financing. You can hear the latest national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. Veterinarians in Manitoba are no longer able to dock or remove a dog's tail. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association amended a bylaw Friday axing the controversial cosmetic procedure. However, breeders are still able to continue with the practice. Caitlin Mitchell at Animal Justice would like to have seen the province ban tail docking across the board.
We absolutely want to see Manitoba update the Animal Care Act to be clear that no one in the province can remove the tails of dogs for cosmetic reasons, whether it's a breeder or a veterinarian.
Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Prince Edward Island have all passed strong laws prohibiting anyone from tail docking and ear cropping dogs and declawing cats. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thanks, Heather Walls.
You're welcome.
It's nice to be back in Manitoba.
Yeah, nice to have you back in Manitoba. You were away.
I was in BC, and I think it's it's not really Canada. It's a really special place, but I hope they know what they've got going on there because, wow.
So you went there and found no snow.
I was just walking through parks and things were bursting again and people's gardens were starting, and they're still wearing Canada Goose toques and hats. And I'm like, because I get it. It's winter. But people were looking at me like I was crazy because I was walking around in a
walking around in shorts.
Yeah, I was like, well, this is amazing. That is an amazing province, I tell you.
It's so beautiful. You're right.
The weather, what Mother Nature's given BC is something special. So I'm glad they're part of Canada. But I'll tell you what, that is not prairie out there.
Great place to visit. Glad you got to go.
Yeah, thank you. I have family out there.
Nice to have you back.
Now, having said that, maybe the warm weather's following me around because, hey, look at today, Abby.
It sure is still spreading around and hanging out. Still waiting for you to get back, I guess, before it cools off again.
Yeah, I'll take it. Well, it's me, I'll take it.
Welcome to the slushy side now.
Yeah,
because it's going to be messy out there. We have a mix of sun and clouds in some regions today. The southern part will be mild. The northern regions remains quite cold with chilly conditions. In Winnipeg and the Red River Valley region, we're looking at temperatures around -1 at this time. Expect sun and clouds. There's a slight chance of flurries in the forecast. Maybe some showers this afternoon. The winds will be gusty at some point. We'll see high of +2. For the Pembina Valley region, we're looking at modern all the way down to the U.S. border with temperature already around +2 at this time. Partly cloudy conditions. That region should be seeing a mix of sun and clouds today. Brandon is sitting at -3. It is clear there. The forecast calls for a mix of sun and cloud also becoming cloudy this afternoon. There's a slight chance of flurries late in the afternoon, becoming windy, highs of +2 also for folks in Brandon. In the Parkland region, Dauphin sitting at -1 at this time, mainly clear. We should see a mix of sun and clouds in that region. A slight chance of flurries also later in the day. Windy this morning, then it becomes light as the day goes on. High will be around 1. For Gimli, we're looking at temperatures around -3. A mix of sun and clouds in the forecast for the Interlake region. Expect a slight chance of flurries or rain and showers somewhere in between this afternoon. It will be breezy at some point, and then the winds will die down. You see high around +3. In the Pamphlet Flon, current temperatures around -3 with light snow that should taper off in the afternoon, leaving mostly cloudy skies. We should see about 2 to 4 centimeters once this system moves on. And then for Thompson and Churchill, Thompson at -19 at this time with light snow falling, and Churchill at -26. Clear conditions. However, the wind chill is something still hanging back in Churchill. It feels like -44 this morning.
All right. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Let's get into what's going on in the commute now. May McKillop's in for Corey. Hello.
Hello, good morning. A slushy, wet day out there. Traveling in the city, I noticed I needed to use my windshield wipers quite a bit getting to work today. Nothing else to report in the city so far, but I will look at some of the highways heading out of Winnipeg, particularly northeast out of Winnipeg. If you're heading to Gimli, Victoria Beach, Lac du Bonny, any of those areas, there's some snow-covered conditions. Partly snow-covered, but the further north you get, it looks pretty snow-covered. As well, we got a message from Josh on Highway 6 from Perimeter to Warren. He warned that it's very snowy and some ice, so please drive cautiously, he says. As well, heading west on number 1 out of the city, we got a message from Brad. From Headingley to Eli, he said it's partly covered and blowing snow, particularly in the slow lane, so in the right lane there. And then, some of the traditional stuff this time of the morning, looking north through the Parkland region on Highway 10, some partly covered conditions, and that goes all the way up through Swan River and up to the Paw, some reduced visibility and snow-covered conditions. So Manitoba Highway Conditions 511 if you're needing to know, or give us a call and let us know of anything else going on in the commute, 204-788-3093.
All right, it's time for a team weigh-in, so you can stick around, May.
I'm here.
So there's a whole bunch of us here. Heather's unfortunately busy in the newsroom, but we've got May McKillop, we've got Abby Adiyemi we'll bring back onto the air and onto YouTube here. And then I think Crystalie Ramakan's with us too, waiting to do business news. Hi, Crystalie.
Hey, good morning, Marcy.
Okay, team weigh-in, you can take a pass if you want, because I'm putting I think, May, you don't know we're doing this.
Put me on the spot.
Crystalie and Abby have agreed. Okay, so the question we're asking people online, and we'll read some responses in a sec here, is whether or not you chat with strangers. Why or why not? And if you do, what's the benefit? Are you in the, are you in the elevator, or if you're in the grocery store, for example, chat, yes or no?
You mentioned that you were in Vancouver, and I was a BC person for a while. And ferry rides, when I would get on the ferry boat, that was my time to chat with people, whether it was tourists on the coast, or I think it's something about being stuck somewhere for a certain period of time. You have half an hour, you're on the boat. What are you going to do in that time?
Well, so, you're going to put your headphones in and you're going to look down and chill out if you're me, probably.
No, I loved
not
it.
Talk to anyone?
I loved it. But I'm also that way with airports and stuff. In my travel time, I like to. But if I finish a morning show, I'm not talking to anyone. I'm going home.
Got it. Yeah. And are you, when you're on the ferry, just to stay there for one more second, are you, hey, I'm May, how are you? Or is it more casual? Hey, isn't it lovely here? Or? Casual. Okay.
Yeah. And then if the moment strikes, then you get into a deep conversation. And sometimes it's just a friendly hello.
Abby.
I come from the part of the world that we're just naturally friendly. So it's a part of me, I strike conversations with random people. Sometimes I just walk into a store just to buy some irrelevant stuff because I want to chat with the person at the desk.
Do you really?
There. Last night I was at Shoppers and the checkout thing was there, but I said no because I want to have a chat with this lady. And I was like, hey, how you doing today? And she was like, oh, and she felt something everybody just came and just gave their things 100%. And she was nobody said anything to her, but I was having a good conversation with her, and she felt it. And I use a gas station that I go pay inside, but I still stand with the guys at the pump to have a conversation. It's they're pumping my car, but I'm
what
standing
does it do for you?
I just see another person as amazing, wonderful, and I just want to know what's going on. Some people want to just express themselves, and we now live in a world that people are glued to their social media. That's the only way you interact, and it's that human connection is missing. But there I am at a gas station, and this dude is people don't talk to us here, but I don't know if my manager is going to be upset, and I just
oh my gosh,
and I have and it's done, and it's
that's
okay,
where
I'll go
we're at.
inside.
Don't engage with the customer. That's so sad. I find that sad. Now, I am usually, to May's point, though, if it's after a busy show, maybe different times of day. So I'm really busy. Of course, I talk to so many people. So sometimes I want that quiet time. But I do see the benefits. I found I missed crowds after the pandemic, and I'm not a crowd person. It was just that physically being around people, saying hello, smiling. And when I'm on vacation, I talk to people constantly. Crystalie, it's your turn.
I like to talk to strangers. I have no problem with that. I think it's you never know what someone's story is, right? So sometimes you can get something kind of unexpected from people, which I think is always that's the best part of life is finding out about things that you don't expect or unexpected, right? So I think that that's great. Although I do, when I walk home from work, sometimes I do put my AirPods in.
Yeah, there's a moment,
And
right?
I'm like, I've been talking all day. But yeah, people in like my building are really friendly. They always say hi in the elevator, or even if they don't even say hi when they get off, they always say have a nice day. So I think, like you were mentioning there, that thing that we lost during the pandemic, those tangential connections, I think are super important for like human socialization.
All right, team Weighin. I like it. Now, this is what listeners have been saying, and then what Crystal and I are actually going to talk about business news in a second. Thank you, May and Abby. Here's what people have been saying so far. So Ted Franzen says, I often talk to strangers, part of the human condition. My 10-year-old granddaughter asked me recently why I called the Costco checkout clerk by her name. I smiled and I told her something special happens in each of us when we're called by our name. So let's leave it there. You can weigh in if you want, 788-3205, or you can weigh in and we'll share some more comments later, because we do have to get to the business of business news. Why have tech stocks been sliding, Crystal Ramlakan?
Well, investors have been rattled by news of a Chinese AI startup that could be big competition. DeepSeek has unveiled a large language model that apparently rivals those created in the US, but costs significantly less. And the revelation is causing doubt about the cost and energy use of artificial intelligence infrastructure and the need for all of the latest microchips. So US companies have spent a lot on technology, data centers, and other investments, and now investors are questioning whether all that money is even necessary. So chip makers like NVIDIA, along with other companies involved in or standing to profit from AI, sank yesterday. Here's Gary Marcus, who is an authority on AI and has written books about it.
The thing is, everything's been based on this kind of mania around large language models, and also around the assumption that the only way you could build them was to make them bigger and more expensive using NVIDIA's fanciest chips. And this new model show that you don't have to have all those high-end chips to be able to do pretty well if you can make certain gains in efficiency by being smart about it. That really changes a lot of things.
But in an expert where the gains over the past few years have been particularly strong, some sell-offs are to be expected. And Marcy, attention is going to probably remain on these big tech names this week as Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and Tesla are all set to report their latest earnings.
That's going to be so interesting. Let's talk about the Bank of Canada's next interest rate decision. It's set for tomorrow. What are we expecting?
Yes, so economists are expecting that the central bank will cut its key interest rate for the sixth time in a row. And that's in light of recent inflation and jobs data. They think will bring the key rate down to 3%. Now, they are forecasting a 0.25 percentage point cut this time, which would mark a slowdown from the two previous half-point cuts that we've seen. Now, inflation fell to 1.8% last month. That was largely due to the GST tax break from the federal government. And economists don't see inflation going back up, so they see enough room here for the bank to make another interest rate cut. Now, experts say higher than expected core inflation, though, and recent GDP growth could mean the bank will just pause. But with that tariff threat from the U.S., they think that should prompt a modest cut. So the Bank of Canada has lowered its key interest rate 5 times in a row since last June. But Governor Tiff Macklem said last month that the bank would likely slow down the pace of cuts going forward.
And you have some information that people should know if they're updating their iPhones or other Apple products, I understand, Crystal.
Yes, so Apple has released a software update that turns the company's new artificial intelligence software, Apple Intelligence, on by default. So the update also disables AI summaries for news apps, which have gained a reputation for getting things wrong. Now, so far the rollout of the AI software has been pretty deliberate and limited, so Apple can test new features and make sure it has enough server capacity. But the latest update will expand the software to more users. So previously users were prompted to turn on Apple Intelligence when they were actually setting up their phone, and that that was a process that included downloading AI models from the internet and some installation. And now, of course, that's going to be different. It's going to be automatic. But Apple Intelligence is being marketed as being able to rewrite text, generate images, and summarize long emails and message threads. And it really is a critical service for Apple as it seeks to distinguish its products from competitors with the AI system integrated right into iPhones and other devices.
What are the markets telling us this morning?
So in Europe, stocks are higher as tech stocks are making a cautious rebound. Germany, the UK, and France are all up. In Asia, Hong Kong stocks are on the rise, while several Asia-Pacific markets are closed for the Lunar New Year holiday. So Japan is down, Shanghai is down, Hong Kong is up. Oil is up at 53 cents to $73.70 US per barrel. Gold is up $3 to $2,743.50 US per ounce. And the dollar is down 0.14 of a cent to 69.4 cents US.
All right, that's our friend in our business news, Chrisley Ramlakan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marcy.
Nice to talk with you. And while we were talking about chatting with strangers, we got a couple calls about why you do or why you don't.
Oh, hi. My name's Rowena Fisher. On the subject of engaging with strangers, that's never been a problem for me. But I was struck the other day when I was at a no-frill store, and it was a really, really bitterly cold day, but the sun was shining. And nearly everybody I saw smiled, and a lot of them said hello. And I thought, there's a relationship here. The colder it gets in Winnipeg, the friendlier the people get. Thanks very much. Bye.
Hello, yes, my name is Michelle Gauthier. Yes, I go to Sobeys and I'll go out of my way to talk to especially the elderly or someone who looks like they might be lonely, just to chat about what they're buying, how their day's going. As well, when I go to a park, I will say hi to everybody as I pass them. And the last encounter that I had was with an elderly couple who had lost their daughter, and they ended up telling me, their story of grief, and it was just very heartfelt. And by the end of the conversation, I was like, I want to give you a hug, and they gave me a hug, and it was just really a shareable moment. So yes, I think we can be friendly, Manitoba. I wave to all my neighbors as I drive by or walk by and stop and say hi to people. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Chatting with strangers, yes or no, and why? 788-3205 or on Facebook. Well, next, the deadline to register to vote in the Liberal leadership race is come and gone. So as it stands now, eligible voters have 6 candidates. That is down from 7. Nepean, Ottawa area, Chandra area is out of the race, the MP there. Mark Carney and Christopher Freeland are still widely seen as the front runners. And to talk about this, Ryan Tumulty's with us via Zoom, the political reporter for the Toronto Star. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning.
So what do we know about why the dropout happened, Chandra area? I guess who was told by the Liberal Party that he actually can't run in the leadership race?
Yeah, he was disqualified. All the other candidates have been confirmed as candidates, but he was left out. We don't know a lot about why. The party cited a section of their leadership rules that says that someone can be disqualified if they are deemed to be manifestly unfit for the job of leader. Not a lot of specifics about what makes him manifestly unfit. In the rules, it talks about someone who doesn't have a commitment to democracy, who has legal issues or regulatory issues, or who has made past public statements that would be bad for the party. So again, not a lot of specifics to why, but he's definitely out of the race.
And that'll be very interesting to learn why, especially because he's a sitting MP. Right?
Yeah,
so if you're
absolutely
unfit to run for leader, then what is going on with your fitness, so to speak, to be an MP? So lots of questions. Let's talk about the supporters that are coming out. There's some people backing Mark Carney and Christopher Freeland. Which endorsements do you think have been most valuable?
Yeah, I look to the endorsements that bring with them a little bit of an organization. So Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister, she's endorsed Mark Carney. She ran for mayor of Montreal before getting into federal politics. She built a political party in that city. And she's been quite clear that, her endorsement is meant to be a sign to those supporters, to those organizers that they should help Mr. Carney. And so she certainly encouraged that. And that's sort of what these campaigns need in a lot of ways. They need volunteers to make phone calls and to help organize fundraising and all the kind of minutia of running in politics. And so, that's an endorsement that's pretty valuable. There are a couple of other cabinet ministers across the country that sort of have that reach and have their own political organization. And a lot of them, frankly, actually have lined up behind Mr. Carney so far.
What do you make of Chrystia Freeland her strategy, talking about Carney as a party insider by saying that Carney's basically the choice of the PMO?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword for her. She, there is a very unpopular prime minister in Justin Trudeau. Even among Liberals, I think there's a general consensus that they waited too long to leave. And that sort of thing. So, I think what we're seeing here is the Liberals understanding they have to distance themselves from Trudeau. Chrystia Freeland is trying to do that. Of course, she has been deputy prime minister for a big chunk of this. And she's trying to do that by closely associating Mark Carney with the prime minister. So it works both ways for her. She's trying to distance herself from the prime minister, trying to get Mark Carney closer to this unpopular prime minister. I think it'll be a challenge for her, though, because she has been deputy prime minister this whole time. Even in the past few weeks, we've seen her distance herself from the carbon tax, saying that she'd scrap it, saying she'd get rid of the capital gains tax hike. Those are all policies that she personally championed. So, she has an uphill battle here for sure.
You think it's going to get combative? I mean, we've seen Freeland now calling for 2 debates in French and English. What do you think on that front?
Yeah, I don't think it'll get too combative. Obviously, they'll be trying to win supporters and they'll be trying to draw parallels. But I don't see Chrystia Freeland ever talking about Mark Carney the way Pierre Poilievre does, for example, because they're all Liberals. And at the end of this race, they want to line up behind someone who can beat Pierre Poilievre, who can reverse the party's fortune. So I don't think you're going to see a campaign where the candidates are hyperly critical of each other. Because ultimately the party has to come together.
Yeah. Just before you go, you mentioned Poilievre. I want to ask about this letter he wrote to Mark Carney where he asks if Carney would have any former Trudeau cabinet ministers in his cabinet. What do you make of that strategy and also how he's been sort of positioning and attacking the frontrunners?
Yeah, I mean, for the Conservatives, if we go back just a month in time, they were running against Trudeau, a very unpopular prime minister. Trudeau was still standing behind the carbon tax. And affordability and the carbon tax were shaping up to be central issues in the election campaign. A lot can happen in politics in a month because Justin Trudeau is not leader. All of his predecessors, potential predecessors, or successors rather, are distancing themselves from the carbon tax. And Donald Trump has become the biggest issue in Canadian politics. So I think the Conservatives are trying to bring everything back to the table where they were winning, where the issues were theirs to command. And I think that's going to be a challenge for them. But I think they're going to keep pushing to do that because we have seen some polls showing the race start to tighten. The Conservatives still have a commanding lead. Mm-hmm. Isn't quite as commanding as it was.
All right, Ryan, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Ryan Tumulty joining us via Zoom, a political reporter with the Toronto Star. We catch up with him most Tuesday mornings here on Information Radio. Heather Wells is in our news center this morning. She has developing news to 7 o'clock.
Good morning. Well, a Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Brock Coots at Patent 5 says leveling the playing field could help Manitoba's craft alcohol producers as possible trade war with the U.S. is looming. We'll hear what he thinks it needs to be done coming up. And veterinarians in Manitoba are no longer able to dock or remove a dog's tail. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association amended a bylaw axing the controversial cosmetic procedure. We're going to hear more in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
All right, thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
We'll have more on that in the next hour as well. In addition, in the next hour, Russell Woodhouse could soon be declared innocent. We're going to hear more about the efforts to exonerate the man who comes from Penimutang First Nation, who came from there rather, and how his case could actually make history. So we'll hear that in the next hour as well. Plus, at 7:40, tonight at the Centennial Concert Hall, the audience is going to actually have the opportunity to sit among the musicians. We'll get a preview of the WSOs from the inside out. I'm Marcy Marcuso. You're with Information Radio on CBC, your morning show on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube. -1 right now in the city of Winnipeg, heading for a high of 2. Already slushy out there and wet in the roads. Winds are west, 40 gusting to 60 for most of our day here. Right now they're west at 27 km. If you need us on the morning drive, give us a call, or if you're walking or biking, 788-3093 with any updates. Right now, just try not to get splashed or splotched. I think splotched is maybe not a word, but you know, it's when that slush comes at you. You're going to want to take it easy out there. It's pretty messy. World Report's coming up next. Stay with us. It's 1 minute to 7.
On the current.
It's the sign of an ailing system with no overnight cure. 6.5 million Canadians don't have a family doctor.
We've been talking a lot about the shortage of family physicians. Now doctors in Alberta are being told to drop their healthy patients and keep those who are more sick because there's more demand for primary care than what's currently available. Coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland. And on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. We know foreign governments have been meddling in Canadian democracy. We do not yet know which of our institutions are the most vulnerable. But today, the public inquiry into foreign interference releases its final report. Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogg will provide answers about what is at risk and what we need to do to protect it. Janice McGregor is in our parliamentary bureau. And Janice, what are you watching for today?
Marcia, Marie-Josée Hogg is a judge, and for those of us who do not have the security clearance to see top secret intelligence, her learned opinion today is the closest we're going to get to a verdict on how worried we should be. Did that committee of parliamentarians overreach and misinterpret what they read when they released that bombshell report suggesting some parliamentarians, wittingly or not, were collaborating with hostile foreign states? This inquiry can't release the names, but it could recommend how to handle this. Does the classified evidence back up the allegation that the Chief of Staff and former Public Safety Minister Bill Blair's office slow-walked a CSIS request to electronically monitor a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister as part of their monitoring of Chinese Communist Party officials in Canada? And as leader Pierre Poilievre continues to refuse security clearance to read evidence for himself, did this inquiry see intelligence that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had suggested exists, laying out that some Conservatives were involved in foreign interference, including during their recent leadership battles? The origins of this inquiry were media reports on Beijing's meddling in the last 2 election cycles, but the threats heading into the next one even broader. Tensions with India over the Modi government's role in killing a Canadian in BC. Tensions with Iran, which has targeted former Liberal Justice Minister Erwin Kotler since the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. And tensions with Russia, as Canada continues to vigorously support Ukraine in its war.
We're almost into a new federal election. Are these recommendations coming too late?
If the commissioner recommends things that require legislation, well, it's hard to imagine that passing before the House of Commons pulls the plug this spring and heads to the polls. A bill with some changes that authorities wanted died when Parliament was prorogued. A new foreign influence transparency registry became law last June, but no commissioner was appointed since to do that work. So the fixes are slow here, while the new threats pop up quickly.
Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
The CBC's Janice McGregor reporting from Ottawa. The crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo is raising concerns around the world. Fighting continues this morning between rebel M23 fighters and government forces. Congolese officials are calling it an act of war and are blaming Rwanda for supporting the rebels. Freelance reporter Chris Ochemringa has the latest from Kinshasa.
A rebel offensive in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo is being met with resistance. Congolese government forces and their allied militias are battling the M23 rebels who are reported to be backed by Rwanda. Kigali has denied the charge. The clashes in the largest city of North Kivu province come a day after the rebels announced they had taken control of the key city. The news of their entry into Goma has sparked protests in many parts of the Congo. The Congolese government has urged people to remain calm and avoid acts of vandalism, but the call has gone unheeded. Protesters attacked foreign missions in the capital, Kinshasa, accusing them of supporting Rwanda. Civil society activists have condemned the armed conflict in the east. Annie Modi is a director of one of the NGOs in Kinshasa.
We are calling on parties to open a humanitarian corridor to allow interventions of assistance of population displaced from the South Kivu, in the region of Minova, Sake, toward Goma, and we are calling on peace. Right now, what is more of concern is peace.
The UN has condemned the violence and urged Rwanda to immediately withdraw its troops from Congolese territory. Humanitarian agencies say more than 400,000 people have been displaced by the violence in the east of the Congo over the past 25 days. Chris Ochamringa for CBC News, Kinshasa.
For a second day, hundreds of thousands of people displaced are returning to their homes in northern Gaza. Roadblocks have been cleared and new checkpoints have been put in place by Hamas-run police and private security. Saeb al-Azhar says he's happy to reunite with loved ones after 15 months of war.
We could not believe it was just a dream to meet our people again, to see them again for a minute. No matter what, we will build it again. We will rebuild it again.
Al-Azhar says his home was partially demolished during the fighting. An American convicted for his role in the U.S. Capitol attack wants to rescind his asylum request in Canada. Anthony Vo was convicted and sentenced to prison for his role in the January 6th attack, but he fled to Canada seeking asylum. He was arrested in BC. As the CBC's Caroline Bargut reports, Vo now says he wants to go home.
Anthony wants to go back to the United States today, and there's no reason why CBSA cannot or should not be allowing him to leave the facility.
Lawyer Robert Thibault represents Anthony Vo, who was convicted on 4 misdemeanor offenses for unlawfully being in the Capitol building during the riots of January 6, 2021. He was given 9 months in prison and was supposed to begin serving his sentence last June. Instead, he came to Canada to seek asylum for political persecution. 3 weeks ago, he was arrested by Canada Border Services Agency for not coming into the country at an official port of entry. He's been detained ever since.
A lot of people are being persecuted.
Vo spoke to CBC News from the Surrey Detention Centre last week. He says CBSA officers told him he was being detained because they think he will miss his asylum claim hearings and consider him a flight risk.
There's no reason why they should arrest me for that, especially when I've been in Canada for so long and I've never caused any trouble and such, and I have given no indication that I would miss any hearings.
So this is January 6th, approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Last week, U.S. President Donald Trump pardoned all the January 6 rioters and commuted the sentences of 14 others. Thibault says Vo no longer needs asylum and wants to go home. He says Vo has signed the necessary forms and is just waiting for CBSA to release him.
To further detain him any longer than is necessary may amount to a further wrongful detention.
We reached out to CBSA but have not received a response. Caroline Bargut, CBC News, Washington.
It was once the largest farm and ranch retail chain in Canada, but now PV Mart is closing all remaining stores in this country. The company has filed for creditor protection. PV Industries says Canadian retailers are experiencing unprecedented challenges, including inflation, rising operating costs, and supply disruptions. In British Columbia, educators say their pandemic-era struggles are far from over. It has been 5 years since the first case of COVID-19 was detected in BC. And students are all still catching up. John Hernandez reports.
16-year-old Vancouverite Yuvi Singh would like to forget about 2020 if he could.
It wasn't natural or healthy because no one got to be with their friends.
He was in grade 6 when the first cases of COVID-19 were reported in BC. By March, schools were suspended indefinitely. Students had to quickly make the switch to online learning.
We didn't get to learn properly. So then when we got to the next year, we were behind.
Researchers say the sudden shift took a toll on students of all ages. Jessica Risk is a sociology professor at the University of Waterloo. She studied the education outcomes for students during 2020.
That was very challenging. That increased a lot of student anxiety and stress because you're asking students now to engage in a new form of learning on a different platform.
It was a very quick ascent for us.
Clint Johnson is the president of the BC Teachers Federation.
I think there's a cohort kind of flowing through, absolutely, that probably still has catching up to do. Some of them, if they're in primary when it started, they'll be with us for, 5 more years probably.
Johnson says kids with special education needs were hit particularly hard. He says schools need more EAs and mental health resources to support them. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
On this day, 40 years ago, some of the biggest names in U.S. pop music entered a recording studio. They came out with this. It was Harry Belafonte's idea to release a charity single like the British supergroup Band Aid had done. And USA for Africa was a really supergroup. The song was written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, produced by Quincy Jones. It featured Diana Ross, Bruce Springsteen, and Stevie Wonder among the long list of stars. And it reportedly raised more than $64 million for what was billed as African famine relief. That is World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Nation Radio, thanks for joining us on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on that app and YouTube, 7:10 AM. Pardon me, on a wet Tuesday morning. We're going to get into your forecast in a moment. It's slushy out there. That's the headline. This hour on the show, the audience won't be in their usual seats at the WSO concert tonight. Instead, they're on stage, many of them sitting among the musicians. We're going to have details of a really cool performance coming up. In addition, this hour on the program at 10 to 8 this morning, Russell Woodhouse could soon be declared innocent. At 10 to 8, we're going to hear more about the efforts to exonerate the man from Penay-Mutang First Nation and how his case could be making history. Stay tuned. Right now, let's get into developing news with Heather Wells this Tuesday morning. Hi to you.
Good morning. Hi. Well, a plan to redevelop the historic Alexander Docks is moving ahead. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a request for proposals for design work on the site. A condition assessment by the city last year found the docks in need of major repairs, and consultations with business and people who live nearby are going to be held this spring. So we'll hear more about that. And Manitoba workers and businesses now have a hotline where they can find out how potential tariffs will affect them as U.S. President Trump threatens Canada with 25% tariffs. Premier Rob Canoe says the province has set up a website and a phone line where you can ask questions. We'll be back with more Manitoba news coming up at 7:30.
All right, thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
So, Abby, this is interesting. So, I was looking at the temperature list, and often when we look at the temperature list, Tuduli Lake's the cold spot in the province.
True.
Right? So I was all excited because I looked at the temperature list and I'm like, oh my gosh, Tuduli Lake's the warm spot in the province. But then I realized that I was misreading it. So in fact, the line above Tuduli Lake on my list is Swan River, and that's the warm spot at 4 degrees. And guess what? Tuduli Lake is still the cold spot in the province this morning. It's minus 29. Oh. We got to call some people in Tuduli. I don't know if they're if they champion that or if they even know. I wonder.
Oh,
so often the cold spot.
Always rooting for them, right?
Right. I know. I was so excited this morning and I just misread it. All right, here in Manitoba, in the southern part of Manitoba, we're really mild this morning too.
Yeah, mild one. And if you do a kind of snapshot of the whole system, we're seeing a mix of sun and clouds, some flurries, some showers in the forecast. Temperatures ranging from mild down south to freezing conditions we see up in the northern part of the province. But for Winnipeg and surrounding areas, we're already seeing light snow drifting at the airport. Winnipeg, the forecast is at -1 at this time. We should see a mix of sun and clouds in the city limits with a good chance of flurries or rain showers this afternoon. Wind gusts from the west. It's going to be gusty, so you need to take care. And we'll see a high of +2. And then this cloudy conditions will stay with us into the evening before clearing and then transitioning to partly cloudy conditions overnight. In summary, the regions we're going to see like a snowfall. We have that snowfall warning for northern Manitoba impacting Lynn Lake and surrounding areas. That region should be seeing up to 10 centimeters once the system moves through. And then Brandon -3, Dauphin -1. We're seeing -3s and -1 at this time, and Morden is already already at +2. So it's coming our way. Winnipeg is warming up to 2 degrees also later in the day.
We're going to hear from someone from Morden, I think, in a minute here on another topic we were asking about. First, though, let's dip into the commute. And it kind of is almost a dip because it's so wet.
It's a bit of a dip, yeah. I was slipping around on the road this morning just in the wet, slushy conditions in the city. We have one note about the city here, here in Winnipeg on Portage and Ferry. The lights are flashing red. Treat the intersection as an always stop. Signal crews are on their way to that intersection. And some highways out of the city, they're looking partly covered. We got a call from Josh. He was heading northeast out of Winnipeg on highway number 6 from the perimeter to Warren. He said is very snowy with some ice. So he warned us to drive with caution. As well, looking on highway number 1 east out of Winnipeg is snow covered currently from Richard to about east into Whiteshell area. And then Brad called us from west of Winnipeg on highway number 1 with some partly covered conditions. He said there was some blowing snow in the right lane, in the slow lane. 511 for any highway conditions, or give us a call on the commuter line, 204-788-3093.
So we're asking you this morning whether or not you, this is related to an earlier interview that we heard on the show, but it's all about whether or not you chat with strangers and what the benefits of that are to you, or if you don't, why not? And seems most of you that are writing in do. So let's read some comments coming in on Facebook, then we're going to get to that call, as I alluded to, from Morden. Aaron Thomas said, strangers often chat with me, and as a result, I'll chat with them. I have purple, blue, and teal hair, so a lot of people stop me and say they love my hair, which 9 times out of 10 leads to conversation. Bill Leger writing in, I chat with everybody, and that includes talking to strangers. My mom and dad talk to strangers. My grandma talked to strangers. She used to say my grandma were all slipping around the same pond. So you always say hello. My dad did weather and sports chit chat. My mother is her mother's daughter, so she engages just everyone. And it used to drive me nuts. But guess what, Bill says? I've become the same, and sometimes it makes my partner nuts. Why? Because I generally like people. That's why I do it. We're all a giant story, interconnected, and I just love saying you're welcome to be in my story if you'd like. So folks are writing in all about this. Zofia Dove saying, because of the countless benefits, including how to take rejection, like, no, I don't want to chat, right? Jody Keel says, I do it because I love learning things about people. And finally, Kev Roberts saying, dog people. Chatting it up. Pet the dog, chat at the person, walk away happy, repeat. So that's Kev's recipe. Finally, let's have the last word, though, to the listener line. This is the call we got from Morden.
Good morning. Dave Stobie calling from Morden. I enjoyed your conversation this morning about talking to strangers. And I've got a few approaches I use when I'm getting gas. And if it's a teenager, I'll say to the kid, hey, what are you saving for? And no doubt they have an answer. In other contexts, when I see someone who appears to be from another country, I don't ask them where they're from. If there's time, I'll say, hey, I've been in Canada 100 years. And when they smile, I say, yeah, my dad came here 100 years ago from Zaporozhye, Ukraine. And if they seem to be interested, I'll say, I'm curious about your journey to Canada. So I find having a conversation starter helps. Thanks.
That one can be tricky because, like, how do you even know? that they're, maybe they'll say, well, I've been here 100 years too with my family. But so that approach can be tricky, I would argue. But I love that you're all calling us in now with your approaches, not just whether or not you chat with strangers and the benefits, but also how you approach people. Keep them coming, 788-3205 if you're feeling like chatting with us this morning. Next on the show, though, let's get more details on a story we've been hearing in the news today. The practice of docking dogs' tails is about to get harder in Manitoba. And as you heard, it's because the Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association has made the decision to ban cosmetic tail docking. Now, Animal Justice applauds this decision. In a statement, they said, quote, amputating dogs' tails in the name of breed standards is a painful and unnecessary practice banned by an increasing number of veterinary associations, Canadian provinces, and jurisdictions around the world, end quote. So veterinary associations in other jurisdictions like British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec also prohibit vets from performing cosmetic procedures on pets, which includes docking the tails and declawing cats. So let's talk about why this practice is still being done at all and also some of the understanding around it. Dr. Jonas Watson is a veterinarian in Winnipeg and joins us via Zoom. Good morning.
Morning, Marcy.
So for those who may not understand, what is tail docking and what breeds are commonly affected?
Tail docking is the surgical removal of the majority of the length of a dog's tail. It's usually done in the neonatal stage, so within the first few days of life, and it's done in a variety of different kinds of companion and working dogs. We're all accustomed to seeing various breeds without tails. Dogs like Rottweilers, Australian Shepherds, Boston Terriers, Doberman Pinschers, and many others.
Now, to be clear here, breeders can still dock tails. That's.
Well, I've been hearing that. I'm not so sure about that. We have placed a restriction. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association has placed a restriction on veterinarians doing it. But it seems to me, and this is my own interpretation, that the docking of a dog's tail represents the practice of veterinary medicine, and those without a license to practice veterinary medicine would not be able to do that. They would be in contravention of the Veterinary Medical Act in Manitoba. So I am not so sure that regular lay people would be able to dock tails. I suspect it probably would be in violation of the Animal Care Act here in the province too. What's
the concern around having an animal's tail docked? And then if you could also speak to why the practice became a standard in the first place.
Well, largely tail docking is intended to adhere to long-standing breed conformational standards, like going back to the origins of some of these breeds, some of which were working dogs and some of which were not. We have always docked tails. Sometimes it's to prevent injury while out in the bush or doing the job the dog is intended to do. Lately, I think it's been largely for aesthetic purposes. We're just accustomed to certain dogs looking a certain way. But as society has evolved and as dogs have increasingly become more family members and companions, I think the utility of docking tails has kind of faded. And, as society has become more conscientious about animal welfare issues, we're starting to look at tail docking as a potentially harmful and archaic practice.
In your time, as a vet, have you had requests to perform this on a dog? I'm just curious how common the practice is for vets in Manitoba.
It's common amongst people who deal a lot with dog breeders. There are some vets. There's probably a small proportion of veterinarians in Manitoba that do this with some regularity, and most veterinarians don't do it at all. I suspect that of the veterinarians who are regularly doing it, they don't like doing it. I actually think that the vote, which was quite a decisive vote the other night, shows that veterinarians really don't want to be doing this and maybe just feel compelled to sort of please their clients, their breeder clients. It's not really nice to do. The puppies vocalize quite a bit while you do it, whether you use a local anesthetic or not. They're often kind of screaming a lot while you do it. And it's quick and they're young, but it represents the infliction of pain for not a very medically compelling reason. There's just not a lot of scientific evidence to suggest that this is a useful thing to do. And there can be real downsides in the short and long term by performing this procedure.
Now, you voted in favor of this, I understand, correct?
Myself and 125 other veterinarians voted in favor of this ban, yes.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether or not, given that sort of when you look at, breed standards you were referring to, and we think about show dogs, right, looking a certain way, to really prevent this, like at a deeper level, and you would have to kind of really get into that world and like change the way that dogs are evaluated in terms of, on the books for breed specifics and such. Would you like to see it go that far, that this would widen out into that world?
I think it's already changing. The Canadian Kennel Club has a allowance for dogs to be shown in their natural state. They will permit dogs with tails to be shown, many of these breeds. They want, I think Canadian Kennel Club would prefer that veterinarians have the choice to either dock or not dock, and breeders have that option. But the veterinarians are the ones who perform the procedure. And so they have said quite decisively that they no longer want to do it. They're no longer comfortable doing it. It doesn't represent the values that we espouse in the 21st century. And so therefore it is not going to be done any longer. And that is in keeping with the great majority of other provinces in this country.
So I guess, the concern that we talked about earlier, which is that breeders can still perform it themselves. They would have to be veterinarians, to be clear on that point.
Yeah, it's a surgical procedure. Veterinarians have to do it. And I'm really not that concerned that most breeders who care very much about their dogs and puppies are going to go out and do this themselves. It is not necessarily a straightforward thing to undertake. And I suspect if breeders want this done, they may look outside of the province to have it done in those early days. Or they may just decide, you know what, I'm going to start allowing my puppies to have tails. I'm not that worried about breeders doing something in some unseemly way themselves. That's just not been the experience that we've seen across the country as these sorts of bans have been put in place.
Do you know, Dr. Watson, how, what's your understanding of how this is going to be enforced?
Well, if a veterinarian, we veterinarians are held according to the rules of the Veterinary Medical Act and the restrictions therein. And so if a veterinarian is caught tail docking, that will represent a peer review complaint. We're a self-governing profession that will go to the peer review committee, and there will be disciplinary action accordingly. But veterinarians are pretty good rule followers for the most part, so I don't think that any veterinarian is likely to continue tail docking going forward.
And just last, you do hear some people saying that some breeds benefit from tail docking. What do you say to those arguments?
I think that most of those arguments are outdated and not represented by science. I think dogs greatly benefit from having their tails in terms of balance and swimming and communication with other dogs and people. So I think the benefits of having a tail greatly outweigh any potential risk that a tail poses.
I suppose we should outline what the actual arguments are. So I think some people are saying that would it be for hunting and working dogs out in nature? They say somehow that the tail could get caught, or what is the argument that you've most often heard?
Well, again, I think largely people want to dock tails because of the looks, but yes, there is some concern among certain breed enthusiasts that injuries can happen while dogs are doing their jobs working. The statistics don't really bear that out. Tail injuries are relatively infrequent, quite infrequent, and I think the preference of veterinarians, at least in Manitoba, would be to deal with those on a case-by-case basis in a therapeutic manner, rather than sort of proactively docking everybody's tail just in case some dogs may injure themselves.
Dr. Watson, thank you for this.
It's always a pleasure, Marcy.
It's Dr. Jonas Watson, local veterinarian. 7:26, we got to move along to morning sports. Scott Reguer's been waiting for us. Hi there, Scott.
Hey, good morning, Marcy.
So there's going to be a reunion of sorts where the Jets are playing in Montreal tonight.
Right, Winnipeg up against Patrick Laine and the Habs. Montreal is, surprisingly enough, Marcy, vying for a playoff spot at the moment, and Laine has played a big part in that. The Big Finn and former Jet star has 10 power play goals, which is good for 5th in the league right now, and because of injuries, Laine's done it in just 21 games. That's about half of what his competitors have played. So good to see Laine fit and featuring prominently again. His mental health challenges have been well documented. He told reporters recently, quote unquote, I just kind of learned to have positive conversations with myself. I've always been kind of negative towards myself, and that's kind of something I've learned to do. So good luck to Patrick Laine tonight. Maybe not too much luck, though. The Jets looking for a fourth straight win and to be all alone in top spot in the NHL ahead of the Washington Capitals with a victory in Montreal. Puck drop is at 6 o'clock.
I wonder if he's still got his Winnipeg is good sweatshirt or if he's thrifted it.
Yeah.
I know.
He said he loves the city of Winnipeg and the fans, so he probably has it.
Let's stay with hockey. It's been a tough start to the PWHL season for the Ottawa Charge.
Right. The Charge got shut out last night by New York and thus fell below 500 on the season. Wins have been tough to come by, largely because goals have been in such short supply. Ottawa is last in the league in that capacity. Reporters reminded Coach Carla McLeod of that after last night's loss and, well, got an earful.
You guys are so drab tonight. Gang, it's the 13th game of the season. I'm sorry that you guys are so somber. How has the first 13 games felt for you? It's a whirlwind, yeah? We have 17 more if my math is right. The volatility of the standings will always be. That's what makes this league great. It's what makes the league great. Is it in 6 games we're going to look here and be like, where are we now?
Carla McLeod turning some reporters' frowns upside down. At least I hope so. Meanwhile, Marcy, I received an interesting email from a listener and a PWHL fan yesterday that reads, "Hi, Scott, why is it acceptable in the PWHL for a penalty to be called for too many men, too many women, too many players? It's easy to change." So thanks to Donna for that, and I couldn't agree more. Genderized position names are very much a hockey thing. Centers are often called centermen, for example. In basketball, they're just centers. In soccer, they're just defenders. Time for the PWHL to take a look at that issue for sure. They're pretty progressive. I'm sure they will.
That's a good email. Let's finish with soccer, where it's a notable day on the calendar for Canadian footy fans.
It is. We are, believe it or not, just 500 days out from Canada's first match at its home World Cup. We don't know who Jesse Marsh's side will face yet in the 2026 curtain raiser. We do know it'll take place at BMO Field in Toronto. Marsh, meanwhile, has been busy making sure it's going to be a success to that end. He says they're eyeing the next international window in June to bring in some stiff competition.
I want to find the right kind of challenges for our team. Games that are difficult, but give us the opportunity to continue to push the development of what we're trying to achieve as a team from a style perspective, from a mentality perspective. I think we're on track for some really good opponents, and we're lucky that there's some gaps in scheduling where we can get some opponents up here to North America and get some good matches.
Marsh looking for teams ranked by FIFA in the 10 to 35 range, so the likes of Japan, Morocco, and Germany all sound pretty good to me. We're getting close.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott.
You bet.
Scott Reger with Morning Sports, and your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it is 0 in Winnipeg. We're melting. We're going to see a high today of 2, but it is going to be messy. There's a good chance we'll see some flurries, maybe even rain showers. Windy as well today. A Manitoba man's name is one step closer to being cleared more than a decade after he died. Russell Woodhouse from Pinemutang First Nation has been considered a convicted killer for more than 50 years. Woodhouse and 3 others were convicted of killing a man in 1973. The other men have since been exonerated, but Woodhouse's family is still awaiting a decision from Canada's Justice Minister. If exonerated, it'll be the first time for a person who has died, according to Innocence Canada lawyer James Lockyer. He is optimistic it will happen.
Hard not to be. I mean, it's so obvious he was the victim of miscarriage of justice. I can't conceive of anyone, any minister, suggesting otherwise.
The Federal Justice Department says it is still reviewing the case. You can hear more on this story coming up in the next half hour, right here on Information Radio. Manitoba workers and businesses have a new hotline to call to find out how potential tariffs will affect them. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening Canada with 25% tariffs on goods exported to the U.S. by February 1st. Premier Rob Canoe says the province has set up a website and a phone line where you can ask questions.
And we'll be there to ensure that we have quick answers to the questions that you have about what we're looking at. And of course, if there's a specific industry or, you're in ag, manufacturing, transportation or whatever, and you got some very detailed questions you'd like to get answered, we'll make sure that we turn those around within a day.
If you have any questions, you can go to manitoba.ca/tariff response or call 204-945-3744. Tariffs on Canadian goods could be imposed February 1st. A Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Brock Coots at Patent 5 says leveling the playing field could help Manitoba's craft alcohol producers as a possible trade war with the U.S. looms. He says small producers in some provinces can sell their products in Manitoba at the same markup rate as local companies, but he says those other provinces don't offer reduced markups to Manitoba distilleries and brewers, and that puts them at a disadvantage.
We really don't have an opportunity to grow beyond Manitoba because we're treated as essentially the same as a multinational if we go into other provinces.
Canada's premiers have launched a renewed effort to remove interprovincial barriers to trade, but Coots doesn't have high hopes big change will happen soon. A plan to redevelop the historic Alexander Docks is moving forward. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a request for proposals for design work on that site. A condition assessment by the City of Winnipeg last year found the docks in need of major repairs. Those docks were built in 1929 and served as a major shipping hub in this city. In 2014, the body of teenager Tina Fontaine was found in the Red River near the Alexander Docks. Zach Peters speaks for the Forks.
It's imperative that this work be done right, be done in consultation with the city's Indigenous Relations Division and so forth, and that the site acknowledge that history.
Consultations with businesses and people living nearby will be held this spring. The demolition and construction of a new dock is expected to cost around $2 million.
Good morning.
Canadian farm supply and hardware retailer PV Mart plans to close its stores in Manitoba. The chain announced last week it will close stores in Ontario and Nova Scotia. Manitoba stores notified customers yesterday they too will close within the next few months. Jules Stengel, a retired dairy farmer, says he's sad to see the Nairn Avenue location in Winnipeg go.
It's not a very good thing if that is going to be the case there. It's good for the farmers, good location for that, good supply. But yeah, for the agricultural sector, it's not so good, eh?
PV Mart has 2 stores in Winnipeg and 1 each in Brandon, Winkler, and Steinbach. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Warsaw signing off on a nuclear energy agreement with Poland.
This agreement is a win-win. It'll support good middle-class jobs in Canada, and it'll mean better access to nuclear energy for Poland, ensuring that you never again have to turn to Russian oil and gas, all while growing your economy with a clean source of power that will help you shift away from coal.
The agreement will see Poland build its first nuclear power plant using materials and services supplied by Canada. You can hear more national and international news on World Report at 8. And Manitoba veterinarians are no longer allowed to perform a cosmetic procedure for dogs known as tail docking. It's removing the tail primarily to conform the dog's appearance to traditional breed standards. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association voted for the ban Friday at the group's annual meeting. Jonas Watson owns Grant Park Animal Hospital in Winnipeg.
What it does is causes some undue pain and harm to young puppies, potentially causes long-term neurological consequences, and certainly limits the dog's ability to properly communicate with other dogs and people because they're no longer able to wag.
This follows a multi-year consultation process with multiple stakeholders. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
All right, thank you, Heather Wells.
You're welcome.
It's time for your regional forecast, Manitoba. Abby Adiyemi has all the news.
It is mild in Winnipeg, but we're seeing drifting snow at the airports at this time. 0 in Winnipeg. Expect a mix of sun and clouds. We have a chance of flurries, light rain this afternoon. The winds will be gusty all the way to 56. Later in the day, and then we'll see some calm conditions later. High of 2 degrees for Winnipeg today. A similar condition in the Pembina Valley region. We're looking at Morton-Winkle, turn all the way to the border, seeing temperatures around 1 at this time. Cloudy skies you're seeing, but you see a mix of sun and clouds later in the day. High also near 2 degrees. Heading west to Brandon, it is -2 at this time. Clear conditions you have in the Westmount region. Forecast calls for a mix of sunny conditions, and clouds will roll in with the sky becoming cloudy as you get into the afternoon. There's a chance of flurries late in the day. Expect some windy conditions to go with that. High also around 2 degrees. In the Parkland region, we're seeing temperatures around -1 at this time. In Dauphin, we have clear conditions. Expect a mix of sun and clouds today. There's a chance of flurries later in the day. It will be windy this morning, becoming lighter as you get into the day, then a high of +1. In the Interlake region, temperatures around -2. Today, we should see some flurries or rain showers in the forecast there sometime in the afternoon. Then a mix of sun and clouds. It's going to be windy at first and becoming mild later, high +3. In the Parkland Flon, we're seeing temperatures around -5. Light snow and some drifts we're seeing. This should taper off in the afternoon, leaving mostly cloudy skies. Expect snow or rain to come later in the day, 2 to 4 centimeters in some areas. The winds will ease by midday and temperatures will feel like -15 due to the wind chill in that part of the province. In Thompson, -20 at this time, light snow falling. Expect this to continue through the morning, tapering off by the afternoon period. Then it will remain cold. We'll see highs near -17. With the wind chill, it feels like -27 this morning. And in Churchill, lastly, -28. We're seeing ice crystals in that part of the province. Expect more of this morning. It will stay with you for most of the morning. Temperatures will get to around -30 later. And with the wind chill factored in, it will feel like -44 this morning. So frostbite is a thing you need to take care. Comparing the northern parts, which is like -30s, and down south, we're seeing 0s and 1s already.
It's wild. Yeah, it's wild. It's weird. All right. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Let's get to what's going on in the commute. We're trying to come up with words, May, for when you get splashed, but it's not water.
I saw it happen yesterday when I was on my coffee break. Someone standing at the crosswalk and a bus drove by, and it was a slow-moving bus, so it wasn't a full splash. What did we say? Sploosh?
Sploosh or slush?
Yeah, and when it's slush, what is it?
I don't know. Maybe slushed. Maybe we should just say you get slushed.
You've been slushed.
It feels like being slapped in the face. It's like
a verb. Yeah,
because it's heavier than like their water.
And then everyone, we all felt for the person who got
slushed.
He got slushed, and then we all just kind of took 2 steps back.
Exactly.
That was the response.
We're sorry, but we don't want
and he did too.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that's not happening to anyone commuting by foot or bike today. The roads are, particularly in the city, really wet and slushy. So watch out for that today. We were looking at traffic lights that were down on Portage and Ferry. Those are now fixed. The crews have repaired and have left, but perhaps expect some delays for eastbound Portage in that area. And then just looking outside of the city of Winnipeg at some of the highways, east out of the city, we have snow-covered conditions. And I can see that the plows are moving along, but Highway number 1 east, all the way kind of to Falcon Lake, Whiteshell area, just about to Richard. That area I'm really keeping an eye on. As well, we got a call from Josh, who was heading north on Highway number 6. This was in the last hour, but he said the conditions were pretty slippery and a little bit of ice underneath. So keep an eye out for that if you're traveling on Highway number 6. Also, we got a call from Brad about the Headingley to Eli area being snow covered with some blowing snow, particularly in the right lane close to the edge of the road. 511 for any of your highway conditions, or give me a call on the commuter line 204-788-3093.
All right, thanks a lot, May. Well, you might have to be careful what you're wearing tonight if you're out and about. You don't get slushed. There's a lot going on, including a really cool event from the WSO. It's being touted as an immersive musical experience. So for Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra's latest show, what they're doing is having the audience take the stage alongside the musicians, so among the musicians. The show's called From the Inside Out. It begins tonight, I should say, at the Centennial Concert Hall, the first of a series. Now, at this concert, you could be sitting right next to one of the musicians as they are playing live. So this style has been very popular in Europe for many years. Now it's here in Winnipeg. CBC Manitoba's community reporter Shanley Vidal and videographer Jason Empson stopped by yesterday's WSO rehearsal.
I am Daniel Reskin, music director of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. I am in the middle, I'm elevated, and the orchestra members are not in front of me, they are all around me. And so are the audience members. They're all around me in circle, and it's not like there's orchestra first all together and then audience around it. It's practically one musician, one audience member. 2 musicians, 3 audience members. 1 musician, 4 audience members. We are all really thrown around the stage, and all the spaces between the musicians are filled by the audience members.
What is the experience that you hope the audience gets out of this?
First of all, it's an opportunity to hear the orchestra the way the musicians hear themselves on stage. Secondly, it's an opportunity to be more physically involved with the sound that musicians produce. It's also an opportunity to see the instruments the musicians are playing much closer and to get into almost the technical things, like what is happening when a oboist is taking his reed into the mouth and how all the keys are working, how the musicians breathe when they play their string instruments, the mouthpieces go into the trombones and trumpet. They get to hear things that they normally don't hear sitting in the concert hall because they sit so close to the instrument. They might hear more of harp or horn and less of the second violins or less of a general sound. But it's a unique opportunity also to see what musicians are reacting to when working with a conductor. It's a unique opportunity to see how musicians react to each other on stage. Because usually, in a normal setup, we have an orchestra musicians on stage, then there's an invisible barrier, and kind of across the street from them, there's an audience members that are listening to the ready product. But here, everyone can get into the kitchen, into the laboratory where we actually make this happen.
I'm Alex Conway. I play flute and piccolo with the WSO, and I'm here performing with the WSO for the Inside Out performance. We haven't done anything like this before, so we're sitting a lot further apart than we usually are, which makes things a little bit more difficult to hear. But to have our audience in between us, I think is equal parts exciting and scary. As musicians, we train to play for people who are, I'd say, at least 10 feet away, if not much, much more in this hall. So thinking about how to adjust the way we play so that it's a great experience for people both far away and up close.
What are you excited about for this performance?
I'm just really excited for the audience to have our perspective, right? To be able to feel what the musicians feel when we're on stage, to be able to see the conductor from our perspective is going to be, I think, a real treat for the audience.
It's a wonderful opportunity also to build a community around the musicians of the orchestra, because we're normally many of them are kind of nameless because they're part of a larger group. But this is an opportunity to maybe even strike a little conversation during the break or something. Not while they're playing. We have to put on the sign, don't talk to driver while driving, don't talk to musician while playing. But that's an idea. It's a very playful, very direct, very relaxed, very informal way of making music and consuming music, where everything is just about fun.
Can you tell us about what's going to be performed?
And for this concert, we chose pieces that are well known by both the orchestra and the audience. A suite from the famous and very much loved ballet by Tchaikovsky, Swan Lake. Symphony by Schubert, No. 7, a finished symphony of only 2 movements, but incredibly beautiful. And of course, we can't stay away from a famous movie music by John Williams. So we are treating everyone with a Cowboys Overture by John Williams. And these are Canadian cowboys, by the way.
Are you planning to do this again?
Absolutely. We hope that it will, really settle and people will understand how much joy they can have out of it. And we're going to do it on a number of occasions next season, and hope that it will really, the word will be spread and the buzz will be there and people will flock in big numbers to our concert.
Tonight. It's interesting because this morning we've had this conversation on the air and you've been writing to us about chatting with strangers. If you're one of those really chatty people sitting there, you need that reminder. Don't talk to the musicians while they're actually playing. But how much fun would it be to have that experience? That was CBC's Shanley Vidal learning all about it at the Centennial Concert Hall in conversation with WSO music director Daniel Reiskin and musician Alex Conway. So From the Inside Out is on tonight, but it does run through Thursday. It is 13 minutes now to 8 o'clock on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube. 0 in Winnipeg, light snow and drifting snow, and today's high is going to be 2 degrees. It's slushy out there, winds are west 40 to 60, and as the sun's coming up, it just positively looks like spring if you're looking on YouTube. That's not the case in northern Manitoba, where there is a snowfall warning for Lynn, Leaf, Puck, and Brochet. About 10 centimeters expected as the snow continues to fall. Well, up next on Information Radio, we just want to highlight something that you can really lean into and listen to today, and that is something coming up on Unreserved. So many Indigenous communities consider horses to be healers, and Sonia Dodging Horse of Tsuut'ina Nation says that horse-assisted learning teaches young people in particular to be confident. This week on Unreserved, Dodging Horse explains how she built her ranch to help young people in her community.
The children are quite excited when they come. It's outdoors, it's an outdoor setting. So everything out here is medicine for our spirit. And that's what I hope for our ranch to do, is to help our children heal on their journeys as we all go through that intergenerational piece, that healing. And so what I hope is to enlighten their spirit and with the horses. So they'll get to build that relationship with the horses through the horse-assisted learning, and then eventually get to ride. And so that day looks like they're excited. They're excited to be around the horses. And the horse spirit is a deep connection to us as Indigenous people, because we use them for our survival, for hunting and from traveling from place to place. And they're also medicine, they're also healers, they're teachers, and they're messengers. The empowerment piece is where they get to work with the horses, where self-esteem, confidence, the empowerment of communication, using their voices, listening and understanding and seeing, and those are all gifts from Nata, our creator. The horses empower those gifts so they can go out into our world more confidently and empowered to speak for themselves and to stand up for themselves. And that's what I hope to do for our children, is to empower them to be proud of who they are and where they come from.
That's Sonia Dodging Horse, who lives on Tsuut'ina Nation in Alberta. She runs Dodging Horse Ranch. And as I mentioned, you can hear more of this story and more from her on Unreserved today. It airs this afternoon at 1 o'clock right here on CBC Radio 1 or anytime on the CBC Listen app. It is 11 minutes now to 8 o'clock. Coming up after 8, we're continuing our series looking at the realities of newcomers in Manitoba. This is building on a national series that CBC's been looking at. We've been asking how friendly Manitobans are to newcomers. So that question's been answered by various guests, and today we're going to hear from someone who works with a Winnipeg nonprofit group with all kinds of different newcomers, hosting sharing circles. They have awards for social justice warriors and such. They have all kinds of innovative programming. But she says that friendliness has always been a challenge. She hears it a lot from people, and we're going to hear from her coming up after 8 o'clock on the program. Right now, though, let's build on another story that we've been hearing in the news this morning, this one about Russell Woodhouse. For more than 50 years, Russell Woodhouse, a man from Manitobans First Nation, has been considered a convicted killer. But now Woodhouse's name could soon be cleared, more than a decade since he died. The CBC's Caitlin Garlick has spent some time with people in the case, involved in this case, from Russell's family to the lawyers pushing for this exoneration, and she's in studio to tell us more about this development. Good morning.
Good morning.
So catch us up on the story, obviously, in a moment, but people kind of need the baseline. So remind us who Russell Woodhouse was, and then, of course, what he was convicted of.
So let's go back to July of 1973, over 50 years ago. That's when this story really starts, with Russell Woodhouse and his brother Clarence. Both were originally from Manitobans First Nation, which back then was known as the Fairford Reserve. And at the time, in the late 70s, they were living and working in Winnipeg. They were young, their adult lives were really just beginning, right, or about to begin, until one day everything changed, when both of them were arrested after a man was stabbed and beaten to death while walking home from work one night at the Beachcomber restaurant downtown. That man's name, the victim, was Ting Fong Chan. He was 40 years old, and according to his obituary, he had a wife and 2 kids. And it only took police a few days to start making arrests in that case. First with Russell and Clarence Woodhouse among them, and Alan Woodhouse, no relation, as well as Brian Anderson, who were 2 other young men who were from the same community of Manitobans. Their case went to trial, and the following year, all 4 of them were convicted by a jury. Russell Woodhouse of manslaughter and the rest of them of murder, in the death of a man they'd never met. Now, there have been some other updates in the story recently. The first big one was back in July of 2023, when the first two of those men convicted in the case, Brian Anderson and Alan Woodhouse, were exonerated. Then came Clarence Woodhouse's exoneration this past October. And I should say, these men were not just acquitted of their charges. They actually were declared innocent by the Chief Justice of Manitoba's Court of King's Bench, who even then went a step further than that and apologized for a wrongful conviction case that he described as being infected by systemic racism. But for Russell Woodhouse, that hasn't happened yet. He died of cancer in 2011, which means he never got to see his name cleared.
So where does Russell Woodhouse's case actually stand right now? Like, what makes it different maybe from those other cases you mentioned where the men were already exonerated?
So as far as the courts are concerned right now, Marcy, Russell is the only one of the group still considered a convicted killer. But that could change soon. So that's because his case is currently awaiting a decision from Canada's Justice Minister, who will determine whether it's likely there was a miscarriage of justice that happened. It's the same process the three other men had, but in this case, it's taking a little bit longer because Russell is no longer alive. Now, according to Innocence Canada, which is the group that helped clear the names of those other men involved in the case, this is the first time that kind of review is happening in Canada for someone who's already died. The group said they filed their application in Russell's case in September of 2023, and Innocence Canada lawyer and director James Lockyer says he's hopeful that the Justice Minister will see what he did when he first looked at the case.
Hard not to be. I mean, it's so obvious he was the victim of miscarriage of justice. I can't conceive of anyone, any minister, suggesting otherwise.
Now, you mentioned, Caitlin, earlier that there's racism involved in this case. What were some of the red flags?
So here's how James Lockyer puts it.
What was particularly unsettling about this prosecution was that the racism was there from the beginning to the end, from the moment of the police investigation to the moment of their conviction and sentencing.
So let's walk through what he means by that. So first of all, there were eyewitness accounts in this case that mentioned Indigenous people generally. That's part of what led police to target these four young men in the first place. And Innocence Canada says looking at those accounts now, they appear to have had no relevance to the homicide to begin with. Then there were the men's supposed confessions, which police said each of the men, who at the time ranged in age from 17 to 21, gave in fluent English. The issue there was that some of them barely spoke English, and all four of them said they'd either been forced or tricked into signing those confessions by police officers who assaulted them. And in Russell Woodhouse's case in particular, court heard he was mildly mentally disabled, and experts testified during his trial they didn't think he could have provided the kind of detailed statement that police claimed. There was also the Crown attorney prosecuting the men's case, George Dangerfield, who was also the prosecutor in four other wrongful conviction cases we know now. And there were the comments made by the judge who was overseeing the men's trial, who made it pretty clear he believed the word of the police over the four young men.
It's kind of hard to believe. You'd think in 1974 things would have been better than this, but they weren't. The racism in the criminal justice system was overwhelming.
How long did it take for anyone to notice the issues that we're hearing?
So that's the thing. It actually didn't take long at all. Even back in the 70s, when these men were first sent to prison, there were people back then who raised concerns. They'd been convicted of something they didn't do. That included Alvin Thompson, who back then was the chief of the men's community. He had a small group of supporters, and they tried to bring attention to the case. But the problem was nobody listened to them.
Not the court system, not the police, no one, It was a dead end case in every which way we turned.
Eventually, that meant the day came when they realized they just weren't getting anywhere, and their efforts to try to free these men sort of fizzled out. For Alvin Thompson, it would be decades before he heard anything about the case again, until one day as he was driving home to Penamutang, there was an update on the radio. The first two of the men had finally been exonerated.
I stopped on the side of the road, and I broke down. These families were ripped apart. I want to make it known that we had known the truth for a very long time, but nobody would listen to us. But the truth is out there now.
What an image, and what that will be like for him all those decades later, when you have said something and then you're hearing that. What is next for Russell's case then, and for the, I guess also for the three other men who've been exonerated?
Yeah, so just because those men have had their names cleared doesn't mean their journeys here are over. For Brian Anderson, for example, he said, it felt good to be exonerated in 2023, but it isn't enough to make up for all those years he spent in prison and that time he missed with his family. And like the other two men who have been declared innocent now in this case, he's still waiting to see if he'll ever be financially compensated for that time he spent paying for a crime he didn't commit. Here's how he describes it.
50 years too late. Shit, I'm an old man now, I was just a kid back then. Apology just doesn't do it. Like I can't put apology into my bank account.
And as for Russell's case, it still sort of remains to be seen what the federal justice minister will decide or when. A spokesperson for the Justice Department told us the application challenging Russell's conviction is ongoing, but wouldn't provide further details. For Russell's family, though, including his brother Clarence, clearing his name would mean the world. And Clarence says he knows it would have meant a lot to his brother, too.
Thanks very much, Caitlin, for your report.
You're welcome.
That is Caitlin Gawryluk, a reporter with CBC Manitoba. If you want to read more on the story, you can also read on our website at cbc.ca/Manitoba, as I like to remind you. Heather Wells, speaking of news, is here with more updates.
Good morning. Well, a plan to redevelop the historic Alexander Docks is moving forward. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a request for proposals for design work on the site. A condition assessment by the city last year found the docks in need of major repairs. Consultations with businesses and people who live nearby will be held this spring. And a Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Brock Coots at Patent 5 says leveling the playing field could help Manitoba's craft alcohol producers and brewers as a possible trade war with the U.S. is looming. I'll be back with more Manitoba news at 8:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
2 minutes now to 8 o'clock, and it's 0 in Winnipeg with light snow and drifting snow. The winds are going to be a little bit noticeable. Winds will be west 40 to 60. They're already gusting up to 50 at the airport out of the northwest. And today's high is going to be 2 degrees. Much different from up north where there's some snow expected and some cold temperatures still looming. Coming up after 8 o'clock, we're going to continue our series about what it's really like to be a newcomer to Manitoba as part of a national series featuring stories from new Canadians. Today, we're going to hear from someone who works with a nonprofit that often assists immigrants about some of the threads she's heard over the years.
On Cue.
Where are you from in Europe? Sweden. Oh, cool. Well, all this furniture came assembled.
The Montreal comedian Sugar Sammy is back in Canada on a 20-city tour. The multilingual, equal opportunity offender will be here to talk about what's on his mind this time out and to give his no-holds-barred view of the state of the world and comedy today.
Cue with Tom Power this morning at 10:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
Are being told to drop their healthy patients and keep those who are more sick because there's more demand for primary care than what's currently available. Coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning, I'm Marcia Young. Canadians could be in election mode very soon, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says it's important that the vote is not influenced by foreign governments or social media giants.
We need to make sure that citizens get to make their own choices in their democracies. The role of money, the role of social media, the role of propaganda influencing democratic outcomes is well documented.
Today, the public inquiry into foreign interference releases its final report, and Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue will make recommendations on how to defend against foreign meddling. As Rafi Boudjikanian tells us, there may not be much time to make the suggested changes.
I hope we see a way forward pointed by the Commissioner and her team.
Public Safety Minister David McGuinty says there is a lot riding on Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue's final report.
I'm hoping there are many good recommendations.
Hogue has held months of hearings looking into foreign interference in Canadian elections, triggered by headlines largely based on leaks from confidential national security sources. Stories have alleged that in a few writings, China attempted to tip the scale during the last two federal elections. UG's interim report also looked at meddling by India, Russia, and other countries. It called foreign interference a stain on Canada's electoral system, said it may have had an impact on results in a small number of ridings, but not on which party formed government.
Democratic practices are under threat by foreign states, usually authoritarian ones.
Wesley Wark is a national security expert who has advised past federal governments. He says Ottawa will have a short runway to put UG's recommendations into place before Canadians head to the polls this year.
So we're going to go into the next election essentially with the defense mechanisms to deal with foreign interference that have been in existence since 2019.
Last year, a report by a national security watchdog found some parliamentarians may have helped foreign governments meddle, whether knowingly or not. One question this morning, whether UG will push the government to act on that intelligence. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
Thousands of people rallying for peace on the streets of Bukavu. This is happening as the Congolese army battles rebel troops north of the city in Goma. That city is under siege. It is on the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Rwandan-backed M23 fighters say they're in control. But the DRC government says its army is holding them off at this point. On the ground, the humanitarian crisis is getting worse. Shelley Thackrell is with the World Food Programme.
Food assistance activities in and around Goma have been temporarily paused. WFP is concerned about food scarcity in Goma and rising food prices as the airport and major access roads within the region have been cut off.
The UN says hundreds of people have been killed in the violence, and the hospitals in Goma are overwhelmed with patients. Thousands of Palestinians are heading home on the second day of open roadblocks. Large crowds of people walk down a road lining Gaza's Mediterranean shore. Their return to the north is part of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Yesterday, more than 300,000 people crossed into the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But as Chris Brown reports from Jerusalem, most of Gaza is in ruins.
Overnight, the terrible reality that there is very little to return to in northern Gaza hit home for those who made the long trek north. People will sleep on the ground, said Abu Muhammad, surveying his shattered former neighborhood in Gaza City. There's nothing left. Saib al-Hazar's house was only partially demolished. He stayed behind while his family fled, and now everyone is reunited.
We could not believe it was just a dream to meet our people again, to see them again for a minute. No matter what, we will build it again. We will rebuild it again.
Hundreds of truckloads of aid are now arriving in Gaza every day, and with Hamas-run police and private guards providing security, there appears to be less looting and less hunger, say aid agencies. UNICEF's Jonathan Crick says among the major concerns is caring for all of the children whose parents were killed and are now alone.
There is more than 17,000 children who are unaccompanied or separated from their parents.
Hamas has said its negotiators are in Cairo to begin the next phase of ceasefire talks. Top U.S. officials are in the region too, and Qatar says it's pushing both sides to keep the fragile truce going. Chris Brown, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Serbia's prime minister says he's resigning after weeks of anti-corruption protests. Milos Vucevic says his departure will lower tensions in Serbia. Demonstrators in Belgrade want accountability after a construction accident. A concrete canopy collapsed in November. 15 people were killed. Many protesters say political corruption led to sloppy reconstruction work. A sentencing is scheduled today for one of the men who admitted to killing former Air India bombing suspect Rupidaman Singh Malik. Tanner Fox pleaded guilty last fall to second-degree murder. He is being sentenced today in New Westminster, BC. Malik was shot and killed in Surrey in July of 2022. He was acquitted on charges related to the 1985 Air India bombing. BC prosecutors say Fox and his accomplice were paid to carry out that murder, but they have not said who they believe hired the men. A Saskatoon research hub is preparing for future pandemics, and researchers there have just received a multi-million-dollar grant. and they're looking and working on developing a new vaccine. Dane Patterson has more.
Volker Gertz says Canada was not prepared for the last pandemic. It was outmaneuvered by the COVID-19 virus.
So let's make sure that next time we're better prepared.
Gertz is the director and CEO of the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, or VIDO for short. It's developing a vaccine to protect against a wide range of coronaviruses. That includes SARS-CoV-2, the virus behind the COVID-19 pandemic, and potentially future viruses.
This is why we're here. We're protecting Canadians from the next infectious disease, the next pandemic, right?
It's a tall order. Dr. Nicole Leary knows that. She's a part of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. It has granted VIDO $24 million to drive that research.
This vaccine could kind of serve as a holy grail, protecting us against both the coronaviruses we know about and the ones that could still strike in the future.
Leary says the vaccine combines fragments of several different coronaviruses. It's meant to prompt a strong immune response.
Our goal is to be sure that the world is never again hit by a coronavirus pandemic.
VIDO's vaccine is being built to be thermostable. It won't need to be stored or transported in a temperature-controlled environment. That allows regions and countries with less resources to have better access to the vaccine. Dane Patterson, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Chinese AI company DeepSeek is making waves on the stock market and in the tech world. Developers say the platform is powerful and cheaper to produce. It has tech companies around the world taking notice. The CBC Scott Peterson joins me now in studio. And Scott, why is this app toppling giants?
Well, this is being considered a real Sputnik moment in the sense that we assumed that the U.S. was the dominant player in artificial intelligence, and now this so-called unknown Chinese company is basically upending all of our assumptions about U.S. dominance. And industry experts are saying that this DeepSeek application is being called a Chinese startup, that it has comparable computational ability to the big players like ChatGPT, Google, Meta, but it does it at a fraction of the cost. And there's three reasons why I saw such turmoil yesterday in the markets. One, DeepSeek is an artificial intelligence app. It needs less microchips. Hence, we saw NVIDIA shares going down dramatically, 17%, losing $600 billion. Less electricity as well is needed because they're using less Cameco. TransAlta shares also dropping in Canada dramatically. And it's a truly open AI system, which means it could undercut Microsoft and ChatGPT because it's entirely open source. This could upend and is upending already the entire dominance of the U.S.
But the U.S. government just made some new investment in AI just last week.
And with big fanfare, Donald Trump and a lot of the industry players, there's a $500 billion investment. And you get a sense here that the timing is interesting, the DeepSeek just coming out now with the Trump administration. And there's also a lot of questions about DeepSeek. What are they? They're being called a startup, but are they part of the Chinese government? Have there been billions of dollars invested behind the scenes that we don't know about? So there's a lot of questions being unwound, and we're seeing it on these markets reacting very dramatically.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Marcia.
The CBC's Scott Peterson. And that is World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
And I'm Marcy Marcuso. Welcome to your slushy Tuesday in southern Manitoba and your cold, snowy day up north. This is Information Radio Live in downtown Winnipeg. You're on CBC 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app and YouTube. Well, this half hour on the program, we're going to continue our series looking at what it is like to be a newcomer in Manitoba. We've been hearing from a number of different people about their experiences and also about their challenges. This is part of a national CBC series as well that features stories from new Canadians. So this half hour on the show, we're going to ask someone who works with a Winnipeg nonprofit, because she's worked with a number of newcomers from all over the world over many years, what she most often hears. And she says that friendliness has always been a challenge. Stay tuned. All right, let's get to Heather Wells first. She's here with developing news from our news center and headlines. Hi.
Hi there. Well, Manitoba workers and businesses now have a new hotline they can call to find out how potential tariffs will affect them. U.S. President Donald Trump, of course, threatening Canada with those 25% tariffs on goods exported to the U.S. unless the border is secured. Premier Wab Kinew says the province has set up a website and a phone line where you can ask questions. A Manitoba man's name is one step closer to being cleared, more than a decade after he died. Russell Woodhouse from Pinemutang First Nation has been considered a convicted killer for more than 50 years. Woodhouse and 3 others were convicted of killing a man in 1973. The other men have since been exonerated, but Woodhouse's family is still waiting for a decision from Canada's Justice Minister. We'll hear more in our next local news coming up at 8:30.
All right, thank you very much, Heather Wells. Let's get to Abby Adeyemi, who's busy this morning trying to make sense of this forecast. It's a tale of 2 provinces, really, north and south.
North and south. Cold on the northern part, mild and slushy in the southern part of the province. Though we have a mix of sun and clouds in the forecast, somewhere in between for the southern regions, with a slight chance of flurries and rain showers possible. We should be spotting that later. Conditions for Winnipeg at this time, we have that light snow still drifting at the airport. Temperatures around 0 for now. We will see a mix of sun and clouds, as mentioned. That good chance of flurries in the forecast. We will see high around a +2. In other regions, Brandon at -2, Dauphin -1, Gimli around -3 at this time. And we have a snowfall warning in the northern part of the province, impacting Lynn Lake all the way to Brochet. And of course, for the power and flame we're seeing temperatures around -3 with light snow at this time. Churchill having that wind chill at -44, so take it out there. But right now, Winnipeg, we are at 0. We look for some sunshine later, and then a good chance of light snow and maybe some rain will come later in the day.
All right, thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
1 province, I guess, 2 realities is what I should say. Let's get to the morning commute. May McKillop's filling in for Corey.
I'm seeing some cold conditions in that northern side of the province that Abby's talking about. Some snow-covered conditions and reduced visibility quite a bit. But I can see on 5-on-1 that the plows are moving along. Here in the city of Winnipeg, we got a call about the collision on the west perimeter just north of Oak Bluff. So for southbound traffic, that collision is in the left lane. Stay right to pass. As well, we got a call with a commute tip for cyclists. This is on northbound Archibald. Around the Elizabeth area, around the golf course there, the caller said that there's snowdrifts and slush in the bike lane, and she saw some commuters traveling by bike struggling a little bit. As well, we got a message about blowing snow south on Highway 75. Anything else you're seeing along your commute, give us a call. I'll pass the message along, 204-788-3093.
We're just getting a call in right now that Ellis and Arlington, there's been an issue right now. So the westbound lane on Ellis and northbound on Arlington, we're hearing is right around the area where the issues are affecting the lanes. So this is Ellis and Arlington. That's the information we have from our listener line right now, from our commuter line. So thank you very much, May. And Abby was picking up the line there while May was on the air. So thanks to the caller. Ellis and Arlington, been an issue there with northbound affected on Arlington and westbound on Ellis. So give us a call, just like that listener did. If you see anything that's developed out there, you have an update on information as well, or if you have an update, rather. 788-3093. Well, what is it really like to be a newcomer? As I mentioned, as part of our CBC series, we've been asking different Manitobans this question, including Rebecca Rivondo, who was originally from Zimbabwe and shared with us last week on the show that living in Winnipeg was a dream come true. She made a move here just over 2 years ago, but there are also some realities of living in Canada and in Winnipeg that don't always match up with her expectations.
When I first came here, everyone had earphones on. In my country, like, people would be talking. You know, I'd be like, how are you? How was your day? You'd all have a chat, you'd laugh, whatever. You don't even know this person. But I think we have, like, counseling in that way. Like, everywhere you go, you're kind of being counseled as you go. You can just stop in the road and someone will be like, are you okay? You know, but here, like, people just walk past. Or people have their earphones on. And you're like, but we're people, let's chat and, like, see what's going on, because everyone is going through something or wants to share something.
Rebecca was sharing with us that sometimes that leads to sort of an impression that people can be icy and you can end up feeling unwelcomed if you are new. Today, we're talking to Winnipegger Janine Barlas, who's with the Coalition of Manitoba of Cultural Communities for Families. This is a Winnipeg-based organization. They create spaces for Manitobans from different backgrounds to advocate for their communities. But there's gatherings and discussions. They have groups and awards to empower and honor young people and justice leaders. And they, as mentioned, honor some in community with their social justice and leadership awards, which I believe are actually taking nominations for right now. But because of her work with the coalition, Janine says she speaks with a lot of new Canadians, and one of the messages that keeps coming up is pretty clear. In Manitoba, friendliness towards newcomers has always been a challenge. She says currently the danger is, though, it lies in what happens when anti-immigrant sentiment remains unchecked and unchanged. And she's with us via Zoom this morning. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit more about that point of view and what you said you've been hearing from people for years, that a lot of people feel like there's a lack of friendliness and there's big issues here.
So regarding cultural communities, we've known for a very long time there's challenges upon challenges when it comes to a sense of safety, a sense of belonging within our communities. And this can go through to, trouble with housing, not having voices heard in public policy. But the great thing is that the CMCCF, the Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families, is a resource, a really strong resource that allows for cultural communities to have their voices heard. And this could be within community spaces, but more importantly, to have a voice heard with public policy.
Which I completely appreciate and have been actually involved and invited to be involved in some of your events. So I know the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
I think as part of our series, as we're hearing people feeling unwelcomed, it's kind of trying to lean into what that sounds like in 2025. When you hear from people that talk about it, are people facing like literal racist comments that are pretty overt right now in 2025?
Absolutely. This is very unfortunate that the racism has continued on. There is a high level of ignorance that has been carried on from generation to generation. And unfortunately, cultural communities are affected by this in their daily lives. It could be just going out into public. It could be going to work and having challenges at work. But we have realized that cultural communities actually have many strengths. And how did we realize this? Is through engagement with a variety of cultural communities. And we've learned that there is cultural resiliency, there is community wisdom, there is interconnectedness, and cultural diversity. And talking about interconnectedness, we're seeing that cultural communities are peace builders. They weave in and out with other communities, they collaborate with other communities and have open dialogue.
In terms of things that people are facing, I understand you said that sometimes people feel like second-class citizens, but that can also depend on whether or not, I asked about racism, but there's also xenophobia, right? So can you draw the distinction between those two things and what you hear from people and in the different ways they experience negativity when they do? And I'm sorry I keep pulling things negative. I think I'm just trying to shed light on how we I appreciate all the work that you're doing, so I don't mean to minimize that part of the conversation, but I just want to lean in a bit more into some of the themes that you're hearing about.
Mm-hmm. So the feeling like a second-class citizen, it stems from, someone that's from a cultural community that's born and raised here all the way to a newcomer. And, there's experiences that we all have, unfortunate experiences, and it could be just the feeling of not belonging. And within that umbrella of not belonging, you do have, for example, things like othering, things like, for example, a newcomer comes and they may not speak English fluently, But we're still being challenged by this. And we all know that Canada, there's a lot of immigrants. You know, the original people of this land are the Indigenous people. So everyone else is an immigrant. Everyone else has a different cultural backing, a different language. So when cultural communities are challenged by this, it does not give you a sense of safety whatsoever within your community. One of the things I did want to point out is this huge step that we had in working very hard with cultural communities in creating a collective vision statement. And if I could take a moment just to read like the short version of this.
You know what? Why don't we leave that to the end? Because I think that that'll be a place for us to build to, and then talk about the vision for what we, the hope, the vision. I think, because I know what's in it, so that's why I'm kind of guiding.
Absolutely.
I think it'll be a really good place for us to sort of get to in the conversation. Why do you think, I asked you about to set up the challenges, but I want to ask why. You've mentioned that this is not sort of a new thing you've been hearing from people. There's been friendliness and people feeling unwelcome for the years you've been working with people, many years. Why do you think that friendliness has been a challenge in our province?
When we're looking at policies within government, that I feel like stems on into what we're experiencing in society. When you don't have cultural representation, when you don't have cultural voices building on policies together, there is exclusivity in what is needed for these cultural communities. Now, if you're looking at a government level and, breaking it down into society, then the learning of, the beauty of different cultures, different practices is not being realized because simply, for example, how the CMCCF has open dialogue and to have cultural communities feel heard, it's not being done across the board. It's not a common practice.
I know one of the things that stayed with me from being invited and involved with one of your gatherings was that there's so much focus on settlement and logistics, which there needs to be. But the actual social pieces of welcoming and following through, and also not just learning from each other also along the way, because there's so much, diversity in our cultural communities to really understand what that means to walk together as Manitobans. Like those things are almost like glaring gaps. Like once you get through those settlement pieces, some of those conversations like you're having, like as you're saying, are not happening enough.
Exactly. And the hope is to move forward into that direction with having a place, hopefully, with the government and to change these policies and to have these open dialogues to humanize one another, all cultural communities across the board, and to come to a place of safety and belonging and inclusivity where everyone can feel that they're valued and heard.
I want to ask you about emotional impact. What do you hear about the emotional toll that the experiences you're describing, or that general feeling of, being othered? What's the emotional toll?
Everyone's experience is unique to themselves, but one thing that we do know is that trauma does get passed intergenerationally from parents to their children, and we hope the best for our children. And, we hope that every parent wants the best for their kids. When parents are experiencing discrimination on many levels, and then you see that their children are experiencing the same thing, that shows that there hasn't been change in society and, not for the positive. So with the CMCCF, we're really engaged in working and making this change and creating these safe spaces that are inclusive. And the one thing we know is like trauma is, it passes along even through DNA. So imagine carrying all these loads, trying to exist in our society with these difficulties. And the beauty is, as well, with the CMCCF, we're going from survival. We're going from communities just surviving, but we are going in a direction of thriving. And we are thriving.
Let's leave the listeners and this morning, Zareen, with that part of that vision statement. I know it's lengthy, but I know you chose a section that you want to share. So this is something that was worked on for years by different cultural communities coming together and very carefully crafted. And you can go to their website to read more. But Share it with us, please.
Yes, thank you so much. So the short version of the vision statement is that we as Manitoban cultural communities amplify our unified voices, honor our heritage, drive equity, peace and belonging, and sustain inclusive futures together. Now, how do we do this? Through cultural preservation, self-determination, having leadership move forward in ways that make sense to them. And again, as I mentioned before, we have moved from survival to thriving.
Thank you very much for being with us this morning. I appreciate all of your time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
That is Zareen Barlas, who's the Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families Board Chair. So you should check out their website for all the different gatherings and events that they have. And also, if you want to nominate someone for their upcoming social justice awards and different types of awards and leadership awards that they hand out. So you want to check that out at Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families.
When you have to leave everything behind,
you're just trying to find a way to stay here for a better life.
What are the real costs of making a new start?
I have faced so many hardships financially, emotionally, and physically.
A CBC News series looks at what it's really like for newcomers.
I am losing hope.
Welcome to Canada, the immigrant experience.
Prepare yourself because coming here is not that easy.
Everywhere you get CBC News.
8:27. How about a bit of music before the news this morning? These guys are going to be playing Festival de Voyageurs on February 21st. Vancouver Island Rockers, Current Swell. They've got a new single out. This tune's called I'm a Mess.
I'm the fastest one you ever seen. I'm a millionaire, I'm richer than the queen. And I'm a heavy hitter, but never with the fist. Think about it, I'll probably be the first to miss. And I don't got a penny in the bank, but I still got it all. A million people that I wanna thank, but I just never call. And I got ideas that I wanna do, and all ideas and zero follow through. And I'm a mess, I need a breather. I'm too my best to please you. I got momentum, but I don't got the moves. I can write a sad song, but I don't got the blues. And I got my together half the time. Leave it last minute, then I'll tend to grind. And I'm a peacekeeper, people pleaser every day. Nature sunset and only use the color gray. And I got ideas that I wanna do, and all ideas and zero follow through. And I'm a mess, I need a breather. I do my best to please you. And I got my together, yeah, only half the time. And leave it all last minute, and then I tend to grind.
Current Swell and I'm a Mess, and traffic's been a bit of a mess, a slushy mess for sure. Let's find out what else is going on. May McKillop's popped back in with an update.
Just got a call about northbound 59, just north of Garvin. There's a car in the ditch, emergency crews are in the median lane, so stay left to pass. And reminder to drive slow, there's some slippery conditions out there.
We're late in the show, but if you do see something that's urgent, you can always call May. Thank you, May. 788-3093. Your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, it's 0 in Winnipeg. It's already 5 in McCreary right now. In Winnipeg today, we're going to have a high of 2. It's going to be windy and perhaps messier because there's a chance of flurries, maybe even rain showers this afternoon. A Manitoba man's name is one step closer to being cleared more than a decade after he died. Russell Woodhouse from Pinemutang First Nation has been considered a convicted killer for more than 50 years. Woodhouse and 3 others were convicted of killing a man in 1973. The other men have since been exonerated. But Woodhouse's family is still awaiting a decision from Canada's Justice Minister. If exonerated, it will be the first time for a person who has died, according to Innocence Canada lawyer James Lockyer, and he's optimistic it will happen.
Hard not to be. I mean, it's so obvious he was the victim of miscarriage of justice. I can't conceive of anyone, any minister, suggesting otherwise.
The Federal Justice Department says it is still reviewing the case. A Winnipeg distillery is joining the call to buy Canadian and reduce barriers to trade between provinces. Brock Coots, owner of Patent 5 Distillery, says it could help offset the impact from any U.S.-imposed tariffs. Coots would like to see a more level playing field for craft distillers and brewers. Canada's premiers have launched a renewed effort to remove interprovincial barriers to trade, and Coots has a request.
The other premiers allow craft distillers in other provinces to receive the same benefits that Manitoba affords you.
Coots says small producers in provinces like Alberta and BC can sell their products in Manitoba at the same markup rate as local companies, but he says those provinces don't offer reduced markups to Manitoba distilleries and brewers, making companies like his uncompetitive outside this province. The final report from the public inquiry into foreign interference is being released today, and it will include a number of recommendations from Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue on how to prevent foreign meddling in Canadian elections. The inquiry looked at allegations of interference by a number of countries, including India and Russia, but national security analysts say it may be difficult for Ottawa to implement any preventative measures in time for the next federal election, which could be called in just a matter of months. A historic Winnipeg site will soon get a major redevelopment. The Forks Renewal Corporation put out a contract to redesign the Alexander Docks. Built in 1929, the condition of the Alexander Docks has declined over the years, and a section was fenced off in 2015. Zach Peters speaks for the Forks.
The Alexander Docks has been a derelict site for 10 plus years. It's fenced off. It's a mess. Something is needed. The status quo is not working and not what any of us would like. And so this is why we've sort of joined into this conversation and to be a part of this with the city to help renew this area.
An engineering assessment last year concluded demolition and construction of new docks would cost around $2 million. Canadian farm supply and hardware retailer PV Mart plans to close its stores in Manitoba. The chain announced last week it will close stores in Ontario and Nova Scotia. Manitoba stores notified customers yesterday they too will close within the next few months. Jules Stengel, a retired dairy farmer, says he's sad to see the Nairn Avenue location in Winnipeg close.
It's not a very good thing if that is going to be the case there. It's good for the farmers, good location for that, good supply. But yeah, for the agricultural sector, it's not so good, eh?
PV Mart has 2 stores in Winnipeg and 1 each in Brandon, Winkler, and Steinbach. Manitoba veterinarians are no longer allowed to perform a cosmetic procedure for dogs known as tail docking. Tail docking is removing the tail primarily to conform the dog's appearance to traditional breed standards. The Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association voted for the ban on Friday at the group's annual meeting. Jonas Watson owns Grant Park Animal Hospital in Winnipeg.
What it does is causes some undue pain and harm to young puppies, potentially causes long-term neurological consequences, and certainly limits the dog's ability to properly communicate with other dogs and people because they're no longer able to wag.
This follows a multi-year consultation process with multiple stakeholders. Breeders, however, are still able to continue with the practice of tail docking. You can find more news updated throughout the day. All you have to do is head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
Heather Wells, Megan Ketcherson, Joni Nicolo in our news center, Travis Peterson, Abby Adeyemi, and May McKillop on our live crew. Thanks, everybody. Also, thanks to the contributors to today's program, specifically associate producers Chidi Akuma, Caitlin Gowerlick, as well as our community reporter, Shanley Vidal, our videographer, one of our videographers, Jason Empson, and associate producer, Issa Kickson. Thanks to our senior producers as well, Leif Larson and Nellie Gonzalez. Now, last look at what's happening on the road, May. Let's start with you, actually.
Yeah, for sure. We're looking at a collision on northbound Arlington at Ellis, as well as northbound 59, just north of Garvin. There's a car in the ditch, and emergency crews are blocking the median lane. Also, just a quick note, post-show, Abenoji-Mekina ramp is closed today from 9 until 2 p.m., but will be open for rush hours. Thanks to everyone who called the commuter line today.
All right, thanks a lot, May. Abby, what's up?
Chilly up north and milder down south. Winnipeg, we're seeing temperatures around 0 at this time. Western Manitoba, similar conditions. Dauphin, the Parkland region, experiencing clearer conditions, warms up to +1, while the northern part will be seeing that snow taper of later. 10 centimeters expected. Snowfall warning in effect. If you're on the highway, because of the light snow we've seen earlier, either the Brandon Highway or the Southern Highway heading to the U.S. border will have a whipping snow in that area, so take it easy out there.
Okay, thanks, Abby. Nice blue sky. Wear your shades if you're out and about. This is downtown Winnipeg now I'm talking about. I'm Marcy Marcus, and thanks for joining us here on CBC's Morning Show. Maybe we'll see you this afternoon as part of Communities in Focus at the University of Manitoba. We are having a town hall discussion about the reality of facing international students. So that's in the Fireside Lounge at U of M from 3 to 4:30. Perhaps we'll see you there. Take care and be well. The Current's coming up next. Thanks for listening.